Hey friends, tonight we're starting with something a little less glamorous and a lot more itchy. A trip back to ancient Egypt, not to the pyramids or golden masks, but to the dusty, footsore world of everyday farmers. Yes, they built an empire's breadbasket, but trust me, their lives were anything but easy. Between crocodiles in the canals, endless grain taxes, and scribes judging their every move, the job came with more headaches than harvests. So before you settle in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this kind of slow, thoughtful dive into the past. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? Drop it in the comments. It's always soothing to see how many of you are winding down with a bit of history across time zones. Now, if you haven't already, dim the lights, maybe let a fan hum softly in the background, and get as cozy as you can. Tonight, we'll walk dusty paths, peek into forgotten temples, and gently wander through a past filled with both struggle and stillness. Let's begin. Imagine yourself standing barefoot on the muddy banks of the Nile. The sun has barely risen, yet its warmth is already gathering against your skin, like a hand pressed against your back, promising another day of relentless heat. You stretch your arms, stiff from a night spent on a mat woven from reeds, that smell perpetually of river water, and the mustiness of countless other bodies that have slept there before you. The fibers poke through the thin linen covering, leaving marks on your skin that mirror the permanent calluses on your palms. You look out toward the field that is not quite yours, though you must tend it like it is, like a mother caring for a child that belongs to someone else's bloodline. The air carries a complex bouquet that speaks of life and death intermingled. Wet clay and churned earth form the base notes, mixed with the subtle bite of animal dung that clings to everything in this agricultural world, and last night's damp ash from cooking fires that struggled against the evening humidity. There's also the smell of human sweat, old and new, and the faint metallic scent of irrigation water that has traveled through countless channels before reaching your corner of the valley. Your first thoughts of the day are not your own. They never are. They are obligations that press down on your shoulders like invisible stones. The harvest is near, and the grain must be counted, taxed, measured, and offered up to a state that never quite seems satisfied, no matter how much you surrender. Before you can even think of your own needs, before you can consider the gnawing hunger in your belly or the persistent ache in your lower back, you must assess the condition of your fields. This morning ritual has become as automatic as breathing, yet it never loses its undercurrent of anxiety. You wade through the shallow water that still pools in the low areas, checking each section of your allocated land for signs of trouble. Have the seedlings been damaged by birds during the night? Are there fresh cracks in the irrigation channels that will need repair before the day grows too hot? Has someone's livestock wandered onto your plot and trampled the young shoots? Each step through the soft mud sends ripples across the water's surface, disturbing the perfect reflection of the dawn sky. Your feet know this terrain intimately. Every rise and depression, every place where the soil is too sandy or too clay-heavy for optimal growth. You've walked these boundaries so many times that you could navigate them blindfolded, yet you still examine every square cubit with the careful attention of a scribe reading hieroglyphs. A single missed problem early in the season can cascade into disaster by harvest time. The tools you use are extensions of your own body, worn smooth by generations of hands before yours. The wooden plow, its bronze blade carefully maintained despite its age, feels as familiar in your grip as your own arm. The hoe, its handle polished by countless hours of use, fits your palm perfectly. These implements represent significant investments, sometimes requiring an entire season's surplus to purchase. You guard them jealously, not just from thieves, but from the gradual wear that threatens to make them useless. Your days follow a rhythm as old as civilization itself, dictated not by your needs or desires, but by the moods of the great river. When it floods, your modest home becomes an island of anxiety. Everything must be elevated, Your sleeping mats, your few pottery vessels, the precious grinding stones that represent your family's investment of months of saved grain, the wooden plow that cost more than you earned in half a season. You spend days building temporary platforms from mud bricks and reeds, knowing that if the flood rises higher than expected, you'll lose everything anyway. Your belongings are stored in baskets that hang from posts like offerings to a god who might or might not be listening. And your tools are wrapped in oiled cloth and lifted onto stilts, protected from the rot that claims so many implements each year. The flooding brings its own complex mathematics of survival. You must calculate how high to build your platforms based on flood markers from previous years. But the river is never entirely predictable. Some years the water rises with gentle persistence, giving you time to adjust and prepare. Other years it comes as a torrent that transforms the entire valley overnight, sweeping away anything that isn't adequately secured. You've learned to read the subtle signs, the color of the water upstream, the behavior of river birds, the reports from farmers whose land lies closer to the flood source. During flood season, your family lives in a state of constant vigilance. Children are forbidden to play near the water's edge, where the current can be deceptively strong. Women carry their pottery and weaving materials to the highest ground available, forming temporary communities on natural hills that become islands in the swollen river. Men spend their days reinforcing dikes and moving livestock to whatever elevated ground can be found. The flooding brings its own terrors. You've seen houses simply dissolve back into the mud from which they came, their inhabitants scrambling to save what they could before the walls collapsed into brown water. Children disappear during flood season, swept away by currents that look deceptively gentle from a distance. Women in labor have died because the midwife couldn't reach them across the swollen channels. Elderly family members, already weakened by age or illness, sometimes don't survive the stress and exposure of evacuation. Yet without the flood, there is no harvest, no silt, no life. You love and fear the water with equal intensity. The social dynamics of flood season reveal both the best and worst of human nature. Neighbors help each other move belongings to safety, sharing platforms and resources without expectation of immediate repayment. But there are also bitter disputes over access to high ground, accusations of theft when possessions go missing in the chaos, and the inevitable conflicts that arise when too many people are crowded into too small a space for too long. But when the waters finally recede, revealing the black, fertile silt like a gift from the gods themselves, the real work begins. This mud is rich with the promise of life, dark and thick as honey, waiting for calloused hands to transform it into sustenance. You wade into fields that squelch and suck at your bare feet, each step a small battle against the earth's attempt to hold you. The silt gets between your toes, under your fingernails, in your hair, until you feel like you're becoming part of the landscape itself. The quality of the deposited silt varies dramatically from year to year and from field to field. Some years it's perfect, fine-grained, rich in nutrients, free of excessive sand or debris. Other years it's too coarse, or contaminated with salt from marshes upstream, or mixed with so much organic matter that it ferments and creates acidic conditions hostile to crops. You've developed an almost supernatural ability to assess soil quality just by running it through your fingers, feeling for texture and moisture content that will determine planting strategies. You bend your back to the rhythm of planting and bend again and again until the motion becomes as automatic as breathing. Your hands work the seeds into the wet earth, flax that will become linen for the wealthy, barley for bread and beer, emmer wheat that sustains the cities and temples far from here. These crops are the foundation of a civilization that builds pyramids and conquers kingdoms. Yet they rarely fill your own belly adequately. You plant abundance that belongs to others, tend gardens of grain that will become numbers on scrolls in distant administrative buildings. The planting process requires precise timing and technique passed down through generations. Seeds must be planted at exactly the right depth for optimal germination, spaced correctly to prevent overcrowding while maximizing yield per area. Too shallow and birds will eat them before they can sprout. Too deep and they'll rot in the moisture before developing sufficient root systems. The spacing must account for the mature size of plants while allowing enough room for cultivation and harvest access. Different crops have different requirements that you've memorized through years of observation and trial. Flax needs slightly higher ground with good drainage, while barley can tolerate more moisture. Emmer wheat produces the best yields when planted in neat rows with precise spacing, but it's also more susceptible to disease if air circulation is poor. Lentils and onions can be intercropped with grain to maximize land use, but the timing of their harvest cycles must be carefully coordinated. You plant not just crops, but also the foundation of an entire economic system. Every handful of seeds you press into the dark soil will eventually become part of tribute payments, temple offerings, trade goods, and the surplus that supports non-agricultural specialists throughout Egyptian society. Priests, scribes, soldiers, artisans, nobles, and even the pharaoh himself depend on the success of your planting decisions. The food you grow becomes abstract the moment it's harvested. Each bundle of grain is counted, weighed, recorded by scribes whose soft hands have never touched a plow. They arrive with their reed styluses and papyrus sheets, turning your sweat and labor into entries in ledgers that determine tax burdens and tribute obligations. You watch them work, these men in pristine white linen robes that never seem to accumulate dust or stains, their eyes stern with the authority of literacy in a world where most cannot read their own names. These scribes represent a parallel universe of power and privilege that exists alongside, but separate from your world of physical labor. They speak in technical terms about yields and quotas, using mathematical concepts that reduce your intimate knowledge of soil and weather to crude numerical abstractions. They measure success by quantities that can be weighed and counted, showing no interest in the quality distinctions that matter to actual farmers. The difference between grain that stores well and grain that spoils quickly, between crops that resist pests and those that require constant vigilance. The scribes are everywhere, like an occupying army of accountants. They tally your efforts with mathematical precision, reducing months of dawn to dusk labor into quantities that can be divided, subtracted, claimed by the state. They never lift a finger to help with the actual work of agriculture, yet they hold absolute power over its fruits. One miscounted basket can mean accusations of fraud. One broken container during transport can result in penalties that consume weeks of additional labor. One misjudged offering to the local temple can bring punishment that echoes through generations. The bureaucratic system they represent seems designed to extract maximum value from agricultural production while providing minimal security for the producers. Tax rates are set based on theoretical yields calculated from the best possible growing conditions, with no allowance for the inevitable variations in weather, pests, or soil quality that affect actual harvests. If your fields produce less than the scribe's projections, you're still responsible for making up the difference through additional labor or by surrendering stored grain from previous seasons. The record-keeping system creates its own opportunities for corruption and abuse. Scribes can manipulate measurements to their advantage, claiming containers hold more than they actually do, or calculating weights using scales that favor the state. Since most farmers cannot read, there's no way to verify the accuracy of written records. Disputes must be resolved through oral testimony before officials, who are themselves part of the same bureaucratic system that benefits from overassessment. The threat of forced labor hangs over every interaction with authority. If your tribute comes up short, if your counts don't match the scribe's records, if you're simply unlucky enough to be in the wrong place when a work gang is being assembled, you might find yourself dragged away to repair dikes along the river, dig new irrigation canals under the desert sun, or haul stones for some noble's tomb. These work gangs are where farmers disappear for months at a time, their families left to tend the fields alone, their children growing thin on reduced rations. Corvée labor represents the ultimate expression of your powerlessness within the system. When officials arrive to conscript workers for royal projects, there is no appeal process, no consideration of personal circumstances, no compensation for the economic hardship imposed on families. Men are simply taken, sometimes for weeks or months, regardless of the impact on agricultural schedules or family survival. The timing of these conscriptions often seems deliberately designed to cause maximum disruption, occurring during planting or harvest seasons when farmers can least afford to be absent from their fields. The conditions in labor gangs are deliberately harsh, designed to discourage resistance and maintain social control through fear. Workers are poorly fed, inadequately housed, and driven to complete tasks with little regard for safety or health. Many return home permanently injured, unable to perform the physical labor that agricultural life demands. Others don't return at all, dying from accidents, disease, or exhaustion far from their families. You don't own the land beneath your feet, despite the intimate relationship you've developed with every furrow and rise of the field. You lease it from temples whose priests have never walked its boundaries, or from noblemen who know it only as lines on a map that generates revenue. Even the grain you're allowed to keep for your family's survival is weighed against what you owe, measured and portioned according to calculations made by men who have never felt the panic of a grain jar running low before the next harvest. The land tenure system creates a fundamental insecurity that affects every aspect of agricultural planning. Since you don't own the fields you work, you have no guarantee that you'll be farming the same plots next season. Leases can be terminated without notice, fields can be reassigned to other tenants, and improvements you make to soil quality or irrigation infrastructure ultimately benefit landlords rather than yourself. This uncertainty discourages long-term investment in land improvement and creates a system where farmers extract as much as possible from soil without regard for sustainable practices. Rental arrangements vary in their details, but share the common feature of extracting maximum value from tenant farmers while providing minimal security or support. Some leases require fixed payments regardless of harvest success, forcing farmers to bear all the risk of weather and pest damage. Others demand percentage shares of crops that leave tenants with barely enough for survival in good years and actual starvation in poor ones. The most exploitative arrangements require both fixed payments and percentage shares, creating impossible burdens that keep farming families in perpetual debt. The legal system provides no meaningful protection for tenant rights. Disputes between landlords and tenants are resolved by officials who are themselves part of the landholding class or dependent on their patronage. Contract terms, when they exist at all, are written in language that most farmers cannot read and interpreted according to precedents that consistently favor property owners. The threat of eviction hangs over every disagreement, every late payment, every season when harvests fall short of expectations. The state demands tribute not in the metal coins used by traders from distant lands, but in the products of their labor, sacks of barley, and wheat, live poultry that squawk and struggle as they're carried away. Jars of beer brewed from grain you grew will never taste, and most precious of all, your time. Time is the greatest burden, because unlike grain or livestock, it can never be recovered once given. Hours spent in corvée labor, days devoted to religious festivals, weeks lost to bureaucratic demands, all stolen from the brief span of years you have to live. The taxation system seems designed by people who have never worried about survival to extract resources from people who live constantly on the edge of disaster. Tax assessments are based on theoretical maximum yields that assume perfect weather, optimal soil conditions, and freedom from pests or disease. When actual harvests fall short of these projections, farmers are still held responsible for making up the difference, either through additional labor or by surrendering stored grain that represents their only security against future crop failures. The timing of tax collection adds another layer of hardship to an already difficult system. Tribute demands often come during periods when farmers have the least ability to pay. Immediately after harvest, when grain stores are high, but before they've had time to convert surplus into other forms of wealth. Or during planting season, when all available resources need to be invested in the next crop cycle. This timing forces farmers to make impossible choices between meeting immediate obligations and maintaining the productive capacity needed for future survival. The danger of this life extends far beyond the administrative threats. The irrigation canals that bring life to your crops are also harbors of death. Crocodiles lurk in their murky depths, ancient predators that have learned to associate the sound of pottery vessels with easy meals. They lie motionless beneath the surface, invisible until the moment they explode upward in a spray of water and terrible purpose. More than one farmer has gone to fetch water for cooking or washing and simply never returned, leaving only disturbed mud and a broken pot to mark their passing. The crocodile threat shapes daily routines in ways that outsiders never consider. Water collection becomes a communal activity whenever possible, with multiple people watching for signs of predators while one person fills containers. Children are strictly forbidden from approaching water sources alone, and even adults carry sticks or tools that might provide some defense against attack. The most dangerous times are dawn and dusk, when crocodiles are most active and visibility is poor. But the crocodiles are at least honest in their hunger, following predictable patterns that can be learned and avoided with sufficient caution. The land itself can be more treacherous, promising abundance only to deliver famine without warning. You've learned to read the subtle signs, the color of the floodwater that might indicate too much or too little silt, the behavior of birds that might suggest disease in the crops, the smell of the evening air that could herald a season of pests. Yet despite all your accumulated wisdom, the forces at work are too vast and complex for any human to fully understand. Weather patterns operate on scales that make individual human planning seem almost irrelevant. A shift in wind patterns far to the south can affect rainfall in regions that determine flood levels months later. Temperature variations that seem insignificant can determine whether pest populations explode or remain manageable. Subtle changes in humidity can mean the difference between crops that store well through the dry season and those that spoil within weeks of harvest. Disease cycles in crops follow their own mysterious rhythms, sometimes remaining dormant for years before exploding into epidemics that devastate entire regions. You've learned to recognize the early signs: unusual discoloration in leaves, changes in plant odor, patterns of damage that suggest fungal or bacterial infections. But recognizing problems and being able to solve them are entirely different challenges. Most crop diseases have no effective treatment, leaving farmers with no choice but to watch their fields die and hope the infection doesn't spread to neighboring plots. Pest management represents another constant battle against forces that seem to have unlimited reproductive potential. Locust swarms can appear with little warning, stripping fields bare in hours and moving on before any defense can be mounted. Smaller insects work more gradually, but often prove more devastating in the long run, weakening plants and making them susceptible to secondary infections. Birds, while generally beneficial for controlling insects, can become crop destroyers during certain seasons when their food sources shift. A missed flood season doesn't just mean reduced crops. It means watching your children's faces grow hollow with hunger, trading away tools and possessions to buy grain at inflated prices from merchants who profit from others' desperation. Your wife might have to take in extra weaving work, her fingers bleeding from the constant friction of hemp fibers, just to earn enough barley to keep the family alive until the next planting season. Famine transforms social relationships in predictable but heartbreaking ways. Neighbors who shared resources during good times become competitors for scarce food supplies. Extended family networks that normally provide mutual support collapse under the weight of universal need. Traditional obligations and reciprocity systems break down when everyone is struggling for survival. The economic effects of crop failure ripple through entire communities in cascading waves of hardship. When farmers have no surplus to trade, local markets collapse. Artisans who depend on agricultural customers for their livelihood find no buyers for their products. Even wealthy landowners feel the impact as rental payments fail to materialize and property values decline. The entire regional economy contracts, creating unemployment and social instability that can persist for years after agricultural production recovers. Conversely, a season of excessive flooding brings its own catastrophes. Crops rot in fields that become swamps. Grain stores are contaminated with mold that can kill as surely as starvation. And diseases spread through communities, weakened by poor nutrition and constant dampness. You've seen entire villages abandoned after such disasters, their inhabitants scattering to wherever they might beg for work and shelter. Excessive moisture creates ideal conditions for fungal growth that can contaminate stored grain with toxins lethal to humans and livestock. These contaminations are often invisible until symptoms appear, making it impossible to distinguish safe food from poison until it's too late. Families face the terrible choice between eating potentially contaminated grain and watching their children starve. The social disruption caused by overflooding often proves more devastating than the immediate crop losses. When entire communities are displaced by water that refuses to recede according to normal patterns, the fabric of social organization unravels. Traditional authority structures collapse when leaders cannot provide effective solutions to unprecedented problems. Marriage negotiations are postponed indefinitely when no family has resources to contribute to ceremonies. Religious observances are abandoned when survival requires every moment of attention and effort. There is no balance in this life, only the constant illusion that you have some measure of control over forces that dwarf human ambition. You plant and pray, harvest and hope, always knowing that a single season of bad fortune can undo years of careful accumulation. The margin between survival and disaster is measured in handfuls of grain, in the health of a single ox, in the goodwill of officials who may or may not remember your face when tribute comes due. The psychological toll of living with such uncertainty affects every aspect of daily experience. You learn to suppress hope for anything beyond basic survival, because disappointment can be literally fatal when resources are already stretched to their limits. Planning becomes an exercise in pessimistic scenario analysis, always assuming the worst possible outcomes and trying to prepare for disasters that may or may not occur. The constant stress of economic insecurity manifests in physical symptoms that compound the challenges of agricultural labor. Chronic anxiety disrupts sleep patterns, leaving you exhausted even after a full night's rest. Worry interferes with appetite, making it difficult to maintain the physical strength needed for fieldwork. The mental energy devoted to calculating survival strategies leaves less capacity for the careful observation and decision-making that successful farming requires. The physical toll of this existence marks your body like a map of suffering. Your back is permanently curved from bending over crops. Your hands are leather from years of rough tools and harsh soil. Your feet are split and scarred from walking barefoot over broken earth and sharp stubble. By the time you reach what others might call middle age, you move like an old man, each step calculated to minimize pain. The cumulative damage from repetitive motions creates permanent disabilities that worsen with each passing season. Joints stiffen from constant exposure to moisture and cold during flood seasons, and ache in the dry heat of summer. Muscles develop chronic inflammation from overuse, creating persistent pain that interferes with both work and rest. The spine compresses under years of heavy lifting and bent-over labor, reducing height and creating chronic back problems that make every movement uncomfortable. Vision deteriorates from constant exposure to bright sunlight reflected off water and sand, while frequent eye infections from dust and debris leave permanent scarring. Hearing suffers from the cumulative effects of wind, water, and the constant noise of agricultural activities. Skin becomes prematurely aged and scarred from sun exposure, cuts, burns, and contact with irritating plant materials. At night, when the day's labor finally ends, your body aches in ways that have no cure. There are no professional healers for farmers, no luxury of massage or medicinal oils, unless your family can somehow spare honey or precious myrrh for such indulgences. Most nights you simply endure, lying on woven mats that provide little cushioning against floors of hard-packed clay. If the trade has been particularly good that year, you might have a linen blanket, but more often you share body heat with your family members, huddled together against the cool night air that creeps in through walls made of mud bricks. The absence of effective medical care means that minor injuries often develop into major disabilities. A small cut can become infected, leading to blood poisoning or permanent loss of function. Broken bones heal improperly without proper setting, creating lifelong limps and reduced mobility. Respiratory problems from dust inhalation accumulate over time, eventually making physical labor increasingly difficult. Pain management relies on whatever natural remedies can be obtained locally or prepared from common plants. Willow bark provides some relief from inflammation when it can be found and properly prepared. Honey has antiseptic properties that help prevent infection in cuts and scrapes, but it's often too valuable to use for medical purposes. Most pain is simply endured as an inevitable consequence of the lifestyle, accepted with the same resignation that farmers apply to weather and bureaucratic demands. Sleep, when it finally comes, offers little respite. Your dreams are filled with the same images that dominate your waking hours. Endless rows of grain that need harvesting, oxen that refuse to pull their weight, scribes with their relentless tablets demanding accounts you cannot give. Even in sleep, you find no escape from the grinding responsibility of agricultural life. You dream of floods that destroy everything, of droughts that crack the earth like pottery, of tax collectors who take more than you can spare. The content of dreams reflects the constant anxieties that dominate waking consciousness. Nightmares about crop failure are so vivid that you wake in panic, needing several moments to remember whether they were real or imagined. Dreams about being conscripted for labor gangs cause you to wake with your heart racing, feeling the same terror you would experience if officials actually arrived at your door. Even pleasant dreams about abundant harvests are tinged with anxiety about tribute obligations and storage problems. Sleep disturbances compound the physical exhaustion of agricultural labor, creating a cycle of fatigue that makes each day's work more difficult than it should be. The worry that prevents restful sleep also interferes with the mental clarity needed for good farming decisions. Exhaustion leads to mistakes that can have serious consequences. Miscalculating irrigation timing, missing signs of pest infestation, or making errors in crop storage that lead to spoilage. Your prayers, offered to gods whose names you can barely pronounce correctly, are not grand requests for wealth or power. They are the desperate whispers of a man who has learned to ask for very little. Simply a manageable season, one where the crops ripen properly before the pests arrive in their devastating swarms, where disease stays away from your livestock and your family, where the tribute demands don't exceed what you can possibly provide without starving. The pantheon of gods relevant to agricultural life is complex and sometimes contradictory, requiring careful attention to proper rituals and offerings. Hapi controls the flood that brings both life and destruction. Reninet governs the harvest that determines survival or starvation. Nepri oversees grain storage and preservation. Sobek, associated with crocodiles, must be appeased to ensure safe water collection. Each deity has specific requirements and preferences that must be observed if their favor is to be maintained. You might pray to Hapi, the god of the Nile's flood, asking not for extraordinary abundance, but just for predictable, moderate inundation. You offer simple prayers to Reninet, goddess of the harvest, hoping she will guide your hands to plant at exactly the right moment. when the soil is neither too wet nor too dry. To Nepri, god of grain, you promise a portion of the harvest if only the seeds will sprout evenly and grow strong. The complexity of religious obligations creates yet another layer of anxiety for farmers who can barely meet their basic survival needs. Each god requires specific types of offerings at particular times of the year, creating competing demands for scarce resources. The rituals themselves require time and attention that might otherwise be devoted to agricultural work, forcing difficult choices between religious obligations and practical necessities. But even your spiritual life is entangled in bureaucracy and obligation. Priests arrive at regular intervals to collect offerings that you can ill afford to give, taking portions of grain, jars of oil, young animals that represent significant investments. There are festivals throughout the year that require your presence, even when your family's food supplies are running dangerously low. You stand in temple courtyards, stomach grumbling with hunger, offering incense or onions, or, if the gods are especially demanding that season, a precious goose that could have fed your family for days. The religious calendar seems designed by people who have never worried about whether there will be enough food to last until the next harvest. Festivals celebrating abundance occur precisely when your stores are lowest. Holy days requiring abstinence from work fall exactly when the crops most need attention. You participate because you must, because the consequences of being seen as impious are even worse than the immediate hardships. But the divine feels as distant as the stars, more concerned with elaborate ceremony than with your bleeding feet or empty grain jars. The disconnect between religious ideology and practical reality creates a profound sense of spiritual alienation. The gods supposedly care for their faithful followers, yet their representatives seem indifferent to the suffering of the very people whose labor supports the entire religious establishment. Temples accumulate vast wealth, while the farmers who provide that wealth struggle to feed their children. Priests wear fine linen and eat well while demanding offerings from people who have barely enough for survival. Yet there is dignity in this labor, even if it goes unrecognized by those who benefit from it most. Your work feeds the cities, sustains the armies, makes possible the grand building projects that will stand for millennia. Every grain of wheat that you coax from the soil becomes part of something larger than yourself, even if your individual contribution vanishes without acknowledgement. The knowledge required for successful agriculture represents a sophisticated understanding of complex natural systems. You can predict weather patterns by observing subtle changes in wind direction, humidity, and animal behavior. Your ability to assess soil conditions by texture, smell, and color equals or exceeds the knowledge of any scholar. The timing decisions you make about planting, irrigation, and harvest require calculations that balance dozens of variables with precision that affects not just your own survival, but the welfare of entire communities. While pharaohs are mummified with golden masks and remembered in hieroglyphic inscriptions that will be read thousands of years later, the hands that actually sowed their bread are forgotten before their bodies return to dust. Your name will not appear on any monument. Your achievements will not be recorded in any scroll. Yet without your labor and the labor of countless others like you, there would be no civilization for the pharaohs to rule. No surplus wealth to build pyramids, no stable foundation for all the art and literature and architecture that defines ancient Egypt. The irony of this situation is not lost on those farmers intelligent enough to understand it. The very civilization that depends on agricultural labor for its existence systematically devalues and exploits the people who perform that labor. The surplus that makes possible all non-agricultural activities is extracted through systems that keep farmers themselves in poverty and insecurity. The stability that allows for long-term planning and investment in monumental architecture is built on the backs of people who cannot plan beyond the next season. The harvest itself becomes a kind of monument, temporary but real. When you walk through fields of golden grain that wave in the desert wind, when you see the storage silos filling with the products of your labor, When you watch your children eat bread made from wheat you planted with your own hands, you experience a satisfaction that needs no external validation. This is creation in its most fundamental form, the transformation of earth and water and seed into sustenance for human life. There are moments, usually in the early morning before the heat becomes unbearable, when you can forget the burdens and simply appreciate the beauty of what you do. The sight of young barley shoots emerging from dark soil, the sound of oxen lowing as they pull the plow through fields that stretch toward the horizon, the feel of ripe grain running through your fingers like liquid gold. These are experiences that connect you directly to the forces that created and sustain the world. These moments of transcendence provide the psychological resources needed to endure the hardships that dominate most of your experience. When you can see your work as participation in the eternal cycles of growth and renewal that govern all life, the immediate frustrations seem less overwhelming. The knowledge that you are performing tasks that humans have carried out for thousands of years provides a sense of continuity and purpose that transcends individual suffering. The seasonal rhythms of agricultural work create their own form of meaning, independent of social recognition or material reward. There is profound satisfaction in successfully completing the complex sequence of activities that transform seed into harvest. The careful timing required to coordinate planting, irrigation, cultivation, and harvest with natural cycles demands skills that few people possess. The ability to read weather patterns, assess soil conditions, and manage complex biological systems represents a form of expertise that deserves respect regardless of its social status. Your knowledge of agriculture is encyclopedic, accumulated through generations of observation and experimentation. You can predict weather patterns by watching the behavior of insects, determine soil quality by its smell and texture, time plantings to take advantage of optimal growing conditions. This knowledge is never written down, never formally acknowledged, but it represents a scientific understanding as sophisticated as anything produced by the educated classes. The depth and complexity of traditional agricultural knowledge rivals any formal academic discipline. Your understanding of plant biology, soil chemistry, hydrology, meteorology, and ecosystem management has been developed through direct observation and practical experimentation over decades. You know which plant varieties perform best under specific conditions, how different crops interact when grown together, and how to manage soil fertility through rotation and fertilization practices. You know which varieties of seed perform best in different types of soil, how to rotate crops to maintain fertility, when to flood fields, and when to let them dry. You understand the complex relationships between different plants, which combinations grow well together, and which compete destructively for nutrients. You can diagnose plant diseases by subtle changes in leaf color, predict pest infestations by shifts in wind patterns, calculate optimal harvest timing to maximize both quantity and quality. This knowledge makes you far more than just manual labor. You are a technician, a scientist, a manager of complex biological systems. Yet because you cannot read or write, because your expertise is practical rather than theoretical, it is never valued by those who make decisions about agricultural policy. Scribes who have never planted a seed make regulations about planting schedules. Nobles who have never harvested grain set tribute levels that may or may not be achievable given actual growing conditions. The contradiction between your expertise and your powerlessness defines much of your frustration with the system. You know more about agriculture than anyone in the administrative hierarchy, yet your voice carries no weight in decisions that directly affect your livelihood. You can see mistakes being made, inefficiencies being perpetuated, opportunities being missed, but you have no mechanism for communicating your insights to those who could act on them. And so, each morning, you rise again despite everything. You lift your wooden hoe, weathered smooth by countless hands before yours, and greet the oxen that are your partners in this endless labor. Their large, patient eyes reflect a resignation that mirrors your own. Together, You step once more into fields that represent both promise and burden, hope and obligation. The routine never varies much. Check the irrigation channels for blockages or damage. Examine the crops for signs of disease or pest infestation. Repair tools that have been worn down by yesterday's work. Plan the day's tasks according to weather conditions and seasonal requirements. Each decision involves calculations that balance immediate needs against long-term consequences, personal survival against social obligations. As you prepare for another day of labor under the relentless sun, surrounded by the endless cycle of planting and harvesting that defines your existence, you cannot help but wonder what lies beyond this narrow world of fields and irrigation channels. Somewhere, perhaps not so very far away, there must be people who live differently, who wait each morning with choices rather than obligations, who own the fruits of their labor rather than surrendering them to distant authorities. For while you may not leave a legacy of stone monuments or golden treasures, the harvest is its own quiet testament to human persistence. It is a monument that the winds will not sing of in epic poems, but which the land itself will remember in the fertility of soil enriched by countless seasons of careful cultivation. Your work feeds the future, even if the future does not remember your name. Yet as another day begins and you take up your tools once more, you carry with you the growing suspicion that beyond the boundaries of this agricultural world, there are other ways to live, other possibilities that exist just outside your experience. Perhaps there are places where knowledge is valued regardless of social position, where skill earns respect rather than exploitation, where a person's worth is not measured solely by the tribute they can provide to their betters. Now let the scene shift from cracked earth and sunburned laborers to the cool, columned halls of power. The year is around 1479 BCE. We are in Thebes, white-walled, temple-laden, and fragrant with incense. The sounds are different here. No lowing oxen, no clatter of tools. Only the shuffle of sandals on limestone, the rustle of linen, and the soft chant of priests as they offer prayers into shadowed sanctuaries. The city sprawls along the sacred Nile like a jewel scattered across bronze silk. Morning mist rises from the great river, carrying with it the scent of lotus blossoms in the distant, echo of fishermen calling to one another as their boats drift between the reeds. Here, the mud brick houses of common folk give way to palatial estates of nobles, their gardens thick with date palms and sycamores that cast blessed shade across courtyards where children play and servants tend to their endless tasks. But it is the temples that truly define this place. Karnak looms like a stone forest, its columns so vast that a dozen men with outstretched arms could not encircle one. The Temple of Luxor catches the light at sunset, its walls glowing amber and gold as if lit from within by the very presence of the gods. Priests move through these sacred spaces like ghosts in white linen, their shaved heads gleaming, their voices rising and falling in ancient rhythms that have echoed through these halls for generations beyond memory. In the palace itself, the air is thick with more than incense. There is tension here, unspoken but palpable, like the moment before a storm breaks. Courtiers gather in clusters, their conversations conducted in whispers behind fans of ostrich feathers. Their eyes dart toward doorways, watching for signs, for signals, for any indication of which way the winds of power might shift. The death of a pharaoh always brings uncertainty, but this time is different. This time, there are complications. And at the heart of this world walks a woman unlike any before her. Her name is Hatshepsut, daughter of a pharaoh, wife of a pharaoh, and soon pharaoh herself. She moves through the palace corridors with the measured grace of one born to authority. Her footsteps, though soft on the polished limestone floors, seem to carry weight that others feel even when they cannot see her coming. When she enters a room, conversations pause, not in fear, but in recognition. Here is someone who understands power, not as something to be grasped, but as something to be wielded with precision and care. Hatshepsut's face bears the refined beauty typical of royal bloodlines, but there is something more in her expression, something that sets her apart from the decorative queens who have graced court before her. Intelligence flickers in her dark eyes like lamplight on water. When she speaks, her voice carries the authority of someone who has been listening, learning, and preparing for this moment her entire life, even if she did not know it at the time. It begins not with conquest, but with absence. When her husband, Thutmose II, dies young, the throne passes not to her, but to his son by another wife, a child too young to rule alone. The boy, barely past his 10th year, stands in the shadow of a legacy too great for his small shoulders to bear. His eyes are wide with the bewilderment of sudden responsibility, his voice still prone to cracking when he tries to speak with royal authority. And so, Hatshepsut becomes regent, the guiding hand behind the boy king. It is a role familiar to Egyptian history, one that queens have filled before when circumstances demanded it. But from the beginning, there are signs that this regency will be different. Where other queen mothers have remained in the background, offering counsel from behind screens and through intermediaries, Hatshepsut steps forward. She appears at state functions, not as decoration, but as participant. She listens to reports from provincial governors with the attention of one who intends to act upon what she learns. The court watches this with fascination and growing unease. Here is a woman who does not simply hold power temporarily, waiting for a rightful king to claim it. She inhabits power, makes it her own, shapes it to her will with the confidence of someone who understands its true nature. Priests whisper among themselves, consulting ancient texts and precedents. The nobles exchange meaningful glances across banquet halls, wondering what this unprecedented situation might mean for their own fortunes. But slowly and carefully, her role begins to change. She appears in public more often, standing beside the young pharaoh at ceremonies, her presence no longer apologetic, but commanding. Her name is inscribed on temple walls, not tucked away in subordinate clauses, but given prominence and weight. Scribes, perhaps initially uncertain of protocol, begin including her in official documents, not as regent, but as co-ruler, her cartouche appearing alongside that of Thutmose III with equal prominence. The transformation is gradual, but unmistakable. At first, she wears the traditional garb of a queen, beautiful but clearly feminine, her status marked by the vulture headdress and the elegant flowing robes that have long signified royal womanhood. But slowly, her public appearance begins to change. Effeminate crowns give way to more ambiguous headpieces. Her posture in official portraits becomes more formal, more commanding. The soft curves traditionally emphasized in depictions of queens begin to be rendered in the angular, authoritative style reserved for kings. The young Thutmose III, meanwhile, seems content with this arrangement, at least at first. He is still a child, after all, more interested in games than governance, more comfortable with tutors than with the crushing weight of divine kingship. Hatshepsut provides stability, security, and the kind of firm guidance that allows him to grow into his role without being overwhelmed by it. Under her protection, he receives the education befitting a pharaoh, while she handles the daily complexities of ruling the most powerful nation on earth. The royal court adapts to this unusual arrangement with the pragmatic flexibility that has always characterized Egyptian administration. Officials who might have balked at taking orders from a queen find themselves naturally deferring to Hatshepsut's evident competence. Her grasp of economics, her understanding of international relations, her ability to navigate the complex religious and political hierarchies that govern Egyptian society, all these skills mark her as a ruler in fact, regardless of traditional titles. Trade, which had languished during the final years of Thutmose II's illness-ridden reign, begins to flourish under her careful attention. She understands that Egypt's power rests not only on its military might or its divine pharaoh, but on the steady flow of goods that brings prosperity to the people and fills the royal treasuries. Under her oversight, merchant caravans once again travel the dangerous routes to the south and east, returning with ivory, gold, and exotic woods that the craftsmen of Thebes transform into objects of beauty and wonder. The military, too, finds itself well served by her leadership. While she does not lead armies into battle, she ensures that garrisons are well supplied, that fortifications along the borders are maintained, and that the complex logistics of maintaining Egypt's far-flung empire continue to function smoothly. Her generals report to her with respect, recognizing in her someone who understands that true military strength comes not from dramatic conquests, but from steady, intelligent administration. And then one day, she takes the step few dared imagine. The moment arrives not with fanfare, but with quiet determination. In a ceremony conducted with all the ancient solemnity that such occasions require, she declares herself pharaoh, not queen mother, not guardian of the throne, but the throne itself. The words, when spoken, seem to hang in the air of the great hall like incense smoke, visible and transformative. The assembled courtiers, priests, and officials witness something unprecedented in their lifetime, something that will be talked about in whispers for generations to come. Here is a woman claiming not just temporary authority, not just regency, but actual kingship, the divine right to rule that has always been understood as fundamentally masculine. She does not hide her femininity, but she adopts the regalia of kingship. The false beard, woven with gold thread and tied with silk cords, becomes part of her ceremonial dress, not as disguise but as symbol. The shendit kilt, traditionally male, is worn over her feminine robes, creating a visual representation of her unique position. The cobra crown, the uraeus that represents divine protection and royal authority, sits upon her head with the same commanding presence it has borne on the brows of pharaohs for centuries. On temple walls, she is shown with broad shoulders and the bearing of a male sovereign. The artistic conventions of kingship applied to her feminine form in ways that create something entirely new in Egyptian art. Sculptors and painters who create these images work with careful deliberation, crafting a visual language that honors both her womanhood and her royal authority. In some images, she appears completely masculine, the false beard and king's regalia transforming her into a conventional pharaoh. In others, subtle feminine touches, a curve of hip, a delicacy of hand, remind viewers that this king is unlike any who has come before. But the people know, and the court whispers. In the markets of Thebes, merchants discuss this unprecedented situation as they weigh their grain and haggle over prices. In the workshops, where craftsmen labor over jewelry and furniture destined for noble houses, the topic of conversation inevitably turns to their unusual pharaoh. Some express amazement at her boldness. Others worry about the disruption of tradition, the potential anger of the gods at this departure from established order. The priests find themselves in a particularly delicate position. On one hand, they are the guardians of tradition, the keepers of ancient wisdom that has guided Egypt for millennia. The concept of divine kingship, with its emphasis on male succession, and the pharaoh as earthly embodiment of the god Horus, seems to leave little room for a female ruler. Yet Hatshepsut handles this challenge with characteristic intelligence and subtlety. She does not challenge the religious foundations of pharaonic authority. Instead, she repositions herself within them. In temple reliefs and official documents, she emphasizes her divine birth, her special relationship with the gods, her role as chosen instrument of divine will. She presents her rule not as a violation of tradition, but as a fulfillment of it, a necessary intervention by the gods to ensure Egypt's continued prosperity and stability. Yet her rule is not one of vanity or indulgence. It is marked by stability, prosperity, and ambition. Unlike some pharaohs who rule through fear or dramatic gesture, Hatshepsut governs with steady competence and long-term vision. She understands that true power lies not in spectacle but in results, not in domination, but in effective administration that serves both the gods and the people. Under her leadership, Egypt enters a period of unprecedented peace and prosperity. The borders remain secure, but not through constant warfare. Instead, she employs diplomacy, trade agreements, and strategic alliances to maintain Egypt's position as the dominant power in the region. Her correspondence with foreign kings reveals a sophisticated understanding of international relations, an ability to project strength without resorting to military force. Trade routes reopen under her careful attention. The land of Punt, mysterious, lush, distant, is visited once again after years of neglect. This expedition, which becomes one of the defining achievements of her reign, represents far more than simple commerce. It is a statement of Egypt's continued vitality, its ability to project power and influence across vast distances, its connection to the wider world beyond the Nile Valley. The journey to Punt is planned with meticulous care. Ships are constructed specifically for this purpose, their hulls reinforced for the treacherous journey down the Red Sea. The expedition includes not only merchants and sailors, but also artists and scribes, whose job is to document everything they see, creating a permanent record of this remarkable venture. Soldiers accompany the group, not for conquest, but for protection, their presence ensuring that Egyptian merchants can negotiate from a position of strength. When the ships return, they bring with them wonders that fill the court with amazement and the people with pride. Incense trees, their roots carefully wrapped in linen and kept moist during the long journey, are transplanted to the temple gardens where they will provide aromatic resins for religious ceremonies. Gold, worked into intricate jewelry and ornaments by Punti craftsmen, demonstrates the skill and artistry of distant peoples. Exotic animals, including leopards, monkeys, and strange birds with brilliant plumage, become living symbols of Egypt's far-reaching influence. But perhaps most importantly, the expedition brings back something intangible but invaluable: prestige. Other nations see that Egypt under Hatshepsut can still project power across great distances, can still command respect from distant peoples, can still accomplish feats that lesser kingdoms can only dream of. This demonstration of capability serves as a deterrent to potential enemies and an encouragement to potential allies. She builds not only in stone, but in memory. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri rises from the cliffs in terraces and symmetry, more a hymn than a monument. This extraordinary structure, carved directly into the limestone cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, represents architectural innovation on a scale rarely seen in Egyptian history. The design, with its series of ascending terraces connected by ramps and staircases, creates a visual dialogue between human ambition and natural grandeur. The temple's construction requires unprecedented engineering skill. Workers must carve into living rock, creating chambers and corridors that extend deep into the cliff face. The precise alignment of the structure with celestial phenomena demonstrates sophisticated astronomical knowledge. The integration of natural and artificial elements, with gardens planted on the terraces and water features that echo the sound of the Nile, creates a space that feels both monumental and serene. Reliefs within show her divine birth, as if to say her rule was always destined. These carved narratives, executed with extraordinary artistic skill, tell the story of her conception and birth as the direct intervention of the gods. Amun-Ra himself is shown selecting her as his earthly representative, her mother chosen to bear a child destined for greatness. The message is clear and powerful. Hatshepsut's rule is not an accident of circumstance, but a fulfillment of divine plan. The artistic program of the temple extends beyond simple royal propaganda to create a comprehensive statement about the nature of kingship itself. Scenes of the Punt expedition occupy entire walls, their detailed depictions of exotic lands and peoples serving as permanent reminders of Egyptian power and reach. Religious ceremonies are shown in elaborate detail, emphasizing Hatshepsut's role as high priestess as well as pharaoh. Traditional scenes of royal triumph are reinterpreted to emphasize her unique position as female king. The temple becomes a pilgrimage destination almost immediately upon its completion. Nobles and commoners alike travel to Deir el-Bahari to marvel at its architectural innovation and to contemplate the unprecedented story it tells. The structure serves not only as Hatshepsut's mortuary temple, but as a lasting argument for the legitimacy of her reign, a permanent reminder that tradition can be honored even as it is transformed. She favors peace over war, diplomacy over conquest, and architecture over bloodshed. This preference is not born of weakness, but of wisdom. Hatshepsut understands that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the capacity to create. Not in the conquest of enemies, but in the prosperity of subjects. Her reign demonstrates that military might, while necessary for defense, need not be the primary tool of statecraft. Her diplomatic correspondence, preserved on papyrus scrolls and clay tablets, reveals a sophisticated understanding of international relations. She negotiates trade agreements that benefit Egypt while maintaining good relations with neighboring kingdoms. Her letters to foreign rulers strike a careful balance between respect and authority, acknowledging their sovereignty while making clear Egypt's superior position. Through skilled diplomacy, she manages to maintain peace along Egypt's borders while actually expanding the kingdom's influence and wealth. The architectural projects undertaken during her reign transformed the Egyptian landscape. Beyond the famous mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, she sponsors construction and renovation projects throughout the kingdom. Temples are expanded and beautified, their walls covered with reliefs celebrating both her achievements and traditional Egyptian values. Public works projects, including improved irrigation systems and expanded harbors, directly benefit the common people while demonstrating royal care for their welfare. These building projects serve multiple purposes beyond their immediate function. They provide employment for thousands of workers, from skilled artisans to common laborers, distributing royal wealth throughout Egyptian society. They serve as permanent monuments to the stability and prosperity of her reign, visible reminders of effective leadership. Most importantly, they demonstrate that a female pharaoh can accomplish the great works traditionally associated with kingship, can leave behind lasting monuments that rival those of any male predecessor. For 2 decades, Egypt flourishes under her rule. The Nile's annual flood brings abundant harvests, filling granaries, and ensuring that no one goes hungry. Trade caravans arrive regularly from distant lands, their goods enriching Egyptian markets and royal treasuries alike. Craftsmen perfect their skills in workshops that hum with productive activity. Priests maintain the complex rituals that ensure divine favor. Their ceremonies conducted in temples that sparkle with fresh gold and brilliant colors. The arts reach new heights of sophistication during this period. Sculptors develop new techniques for rendering the human form, creating works of unprecedented realism and emotional depth. Painters experiment with new pigments and compositions, their tomb decorations and temple murals achieving levels of beauty that will inspire artists for centuries to come. Musicians and poets find patronage for their work, their compositions celebrating not only traditional themes, but also the unique achievements of their unprecedented pharaoh. Even the common people benefit from the general prosperity. Archaeological evidence from this period shows improvements in living standards across all levels of society. Houses are better constructed, with improved ventilation and water access. Pottery and household goods show increased refinement, suggesting that ordinary families have more disposable income to spend on non-essential items. Burial goods from non-royal tombs indicate that even modest families can afford to provide their dead with comfortable afterlives. Hatshepsut proves what few believed, that a woman could wear the double crown and keep the 2 lands united. Her reign becomes living proof that effective leadership depends not on gender, but on wisdom, competence, and dedication to the welfare of the kingdom. She demonstrates that the qualities essential to good governance, intelligence, diplomacy, administrative skill, and concern for justice are not inherently masculine traits, but human ones. The success of her reign forces a re-evaluation of traditional assumptions about power and gender. While she adopts the external trappings of male kingship, she brings to the role perspectives and approaches that are distinctly her own. Her emphasis on peace over war, on building over conquest, on prosperity over glory, creates a model of leadership that stands as an alternative to the more militaristic traditions of pharaonic rule. International recognition of her legitimacy grows throughout her reign. Foreign kings address her with the same titles and honors they accord to male pharaohs. Trade delegations arrive at her court, bearing gifts appropriate for a great ruler, their presence acknowledging Egypt's continued status as the preeminent power of the ancient world. Diplomatic marriages and alliances are negotiated on the same terms as those concluded by her male predecessors. But even as her reign reaches its zenith, there are signs of the challenges that will eventually confront her legacy. The young Thutmose III, no longer a child, but a man approaching his prime, begins to play a more active role in government. He leads military expeditions to maintain Egypt's influence in its Asian territories, gaining experience and credibility as a war leader. His supporters at court, who have waited patiently through the years of Hatshepsut's dominance, begin to position themselves for an eventual transition of power. The relationship between Hatshepsut and Thutmose, the third during these later years, is complex and largely hidden from historical view. There is no evidence of open conflict between them, no dramatic confrontations or public disputes. Instead, they seem to maintain a careful balance, each recognizing the other's legitimate claims to authority while working to preserve the stability that has characterized Egyptian government throughout their unusual partnership. Yet, her legacy becomes as fragile as papyrus left in the sun. Despite the undeniable success of her reign, despite the prosperity and stability she has brought to Egypt, despite the monuments and achievements that seem to guarantee her remembrance, forces are already at work that will nearly erase her from history. The problem lies partly in the unprecedented nature of her rule. Egyptian historical tradition, with its emphasis on precedent and continuity, struggles to accommodate the reality of a female pharaoh. The scribes and chroniclers who record official history work within established frameworks that provide little space for such innovations. Where they cannot ignore her achievements, they tend to minimize them or attribute them to divine intervention rather than human capability. Religious conservatism also plays a role in undermining her legacy. While Hatshepsut manages to win acceptance from the priesthood during her lifetime, largely through her generous patronage of temples and careful attention to traditional rituals, there remains an undercurrent of unease about the theological implications of female kingship. Some priests argue that her rule, however successful, represents a dangerous departure from divinely ordained tradition. Political calculations by her successors had another layer of complexity to the preservation of her memory. Thutmose III, when he eventually assumes sole power, faces pressure to establish his own legitimacy and to distance himself from the unusual circumstances of his early reign. Emphasizing Hatshepsut's achievements might be seen as diminishing his own accomplishments or calling into question his rightful claim to the throne. After her death, the child she once ruled beside, now grown to be Thutmose III, begins a campaign not of violence, but of erasure. The process is methodical, deliberate, and thorough. Her name is chipped away from temple walls, the hieroglyphs that spell out her identity carefully removed while leaving surrounding text intact. Statues are torn down or recarved, their features altered to represent male pharaohs or destroyed entirely. Her image is replaced in reliefs and paintings, masculine figures inserted where her form once stood. Not immediately, not in fury, but gradually, carefully, as if her reign had never been. The erasure follows a pattern that suggests systematic planning rather than spontaneous anger. Priority is given to the most visible monuments, those that ordinary people might see and remember. The mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, too magnificent to destroy entirely, is defaced and abandoned, its gardens allowed to wither, and its chambers sealed. The process is so thorough that it nearly succeeds in its apparent goal. Within a few generations, Hatshepsut becomes a shadowy figure, remembered in fragments and whispers, if at all. Official king lists, compiled by later scribes, omit her name entirely, jumping from Thutmose II directly to Thutmose III, as if the intervening years had never existed. The woman who ruled Egypt for 2 decades becomes a non-person, her achievements attributed to others or forgotten entirely. Why he did this is still debated among scholars and historians. Was it resentment, a delayed reaction to years of being overshadowed by his stepmother's powerful personality? The psychological dynamics of their relationship remain largely opaque, hidden behind the formal protocols of royal court life. It is possible that Thutmose III harbored genuine anger at having been denied what he saw as his rightful role, though the evidence suggests that Hatshepsut prepared him carefully for eventual sole rule. Political caution offers another explanation. Thutmose III may have calculated that emphasizing his association with a female pharaoh would undermine his own authority, particularly as he sought to establish himself as a great military leader. In a culture that valued martial prowess as an essential royal virtue, his peaceful coexistence with Hatshepsut during her reign might be seen as a sign of weakness rather than wisdom. A priestly mandate to preserve male succession could also have motivated the erasure. The religious establishment, while accommodating Hatshepsut during her lifetime, may have pressured her successor to eliminate evidence of female rule in order to preserve traditional theological concepts. The pharaoh as earthly incarnation of Horus, the divine son, left little conceptual room for female kingship, despite Hatshepsut's successful demonstration of its practical possibility, or simply a rewriting of history to suit new narratives. Thutmose III, who becomes one of Egypt's greatest conqueror pharaohs, may have wanted to present his reign as a return to traditional martial values after what could be portrayed as an aberrant period of female rule. Eliminating Hatshepsut from the record would support a narrative of restored masculine authority and military vigor. We cannot know for certain what motivated this systematic attempt to erase one of ancient Egypt's most successful rulers. The ancient sources provide few clues about the personal relationships and political calculations that drove these decisions. What we do know is that the effort nearly succeeded, creating a gap in historical knowledge that would persist for millennia. But what we do know is that, for centuries, her story vanished beneath dust and denial. The woman who had ruled Egypt with wisdom and success, who had brought peace and prosperity to the two lands, who had proven that effective leadership transcended gender, became a forgotten figure. Her magnificent temple was abandoned to the desert winds, its terraces empty of the pilgrims who had once marveled at its beauty. Her name, once carved in stone throughout the kingdom, survived only in fragments too small or too hidden to attract the attention of those seeking to erase her memory. The irony is profound and tragic. A ruler whose reign had been marked by unprecedented prosperity and achievement, whose diplomatic skills had maintained peace while expanding Egypt's influence, whose architectural projects had rivaled those of the greatest pharaohs, was systematically removed from the historical record by successors who could not match her accomplishments, even as they denied her legacy. For medieval and early modern historians, attempting to piece together the chronology of ancient Egypt, the missing years of Hatshepsut's reign created puzzling gaps and inconsistencies. King lists that jumped from Thutmose II to Thutmose III without explanation, artistic styles that seemed to develop in impossible ways, architectural innovations that appeared without precedent. All these anomalies pointed to missing pieces in the historical puzzle. It would take modern archaeologists working centuries later to piece her life back together. The rediscovery of Hatshepsut began in the 19th century as European scholars and adventurers started systematic exploration of Egyptian monuments. Early archaeologists, working with crude tools and limited understanding of ancient Egyptian culture initially misinterpreted the evidence they found. To read the faint inscriptions on half-destroyed blocks became an exercise in historical detective work. Each fragment of carved stone, each partially obliterated hieroglyph, each architectural detail that seemed out of place contributed to a growing understanding that the official histories were incomplete. Scholars began to recognize patterns in the destruction, noting that certain names and images had been systematically targeted for elimination. To recognize that the king shown in some images with broad hips and delicate hands was not a man at all required a fundamental shift in archaeological thinking. For decades, scholars had assumed that any figure wearing pharaonic regalia must be male, dismissing subtle feminine characteristics as artistic quirks or copying errors. Only gradually did the evidence accumulate to support the radical conclusion that ancient Egypt had been ruled by a woman who had adopted the full prerogatives of kingship. The process of rediscovery was painstaking and often controversial. Each new interpretation of evidence challenged established understanding of ancient Egyptian history and culture. Conservative scholars resisted conclusions that seemed to overturn centuries of accepted wisdom. The idea that a woman could have ruled Egypt as pharaoh, not merely as regent or queen mother, struck many as historically impossible. It is only in the quiet diligence of excavation that Hatshepsut breathes again. Modern archaeological techniques, including advanced photography, chemical analysis, and computer reconstruction, have allowed researchers to recover information that seemed permanently lost. Inscriptions invisible to the naked eye emerge under special lighting. Fragments scattered across museum collections worldwide are reunited through digital cataloging. Missing pieces of the historical puzzle are gradually fitted back into place. The painstaking work of restoration extends beyond simply recovering facts about Hatshepsut's reign to reconstructing an understanding of her significance in ancient Egyptian history. Each recovered inscription, each reconstructed statue, each clarified timeline contributes to a growing appreciation of her achievements and their context within the broader sweep of pharaonic civilization. And yet, in some ways, her story never left. Her temple still rises at Deir el-Bahari, where the cliffs catch the sun each morning and hold it in stillness. Despite centuries of neglect and deliberate vandalism, despite the removal of many of its finest decorations and the destruction of its gardens, the basic structure remains as a testament to the vision and ambition of its creator. The winds that pass through its pillars speak not of power lost, but of dignity reclaimed. Visitors to the site today can still sense something of the grandeur that once characterized this remarkable monument. The interplay of natural and artificial elements, the careful proportions of the terrace design, the integration of architecture with landscape, all these continue to demonstrate the sophisticated aesthetic vision that guided its construction. Though her name was nearly forgotten, her vision remains etched in stone, enduring, patient, and calm. The temple at Deir el-Bahari stands as more than just an archaeological curiosity or tourist destination. It represents a permanent argument for the possibility of alternative approaches to power and authority, a lasting reminder that innovation and tradition can coexist, that leadership takes many forms. A woman once denied the pageantry of remembrance is now whispered about in books, discussed in hushed tones of admiration, and quietly restored to the lineage she helped define. Modern scholarship has not only recovered the facts of her reign, but has begun to appreciate its broader significance. Hatshepsut emerges from the shadows of history, not as an aberration or anomaly, but as a legitimate and successful pharaoh whose achievements deserve recognition alongside those of her male counterparts. In the end, Hatshepsut's triumph was not only in ruling as pharaoh, but in reminding us that history may sleep, but it does not forget. Her story, nearly lost to the deliberate efforts of those who sought to erase it, has emerged stronger and more compelling than ever. The woman who proved that effective leadership transcends gender, who demonstrated that peace can be as powerful as war, who showed that building can be more lasting than conquest, has finally received the recognition that was systematically denied to her in ancient times. The lessons of her reign resonate across the centuries, speaking to contemporary debates about power, authority, and the role of women in leadership. Her example suggests that the qualities essential to good governance, wisdom, diplomatic skill, concern for justice, and dedication to the common good are not determined by gender, but by character and competence. As we stand at the threshold of her story's end, we find ourselves drawn inexorably toward another tale, one that will test the very foundations of the world she helped to build. For even as Hatshepsut's temple catches the morning light at Deir el-Bahari, storms are gathering in distant lands. Across the great green sea, beyond the trading posts and vassal cities that mark the edges of Egyptian influence, new powers are stirring. The Bronze Age world that has known Egyptian dominance for centuries is about to face its greatest crisis, a catastrophe so complete that it will reshape civilization itself. The peaceful prosperity that marked Hatshepsut's reign, the stable international order that her diplomacy helped to maintain, all of this is about to be swept away in a tide of destruction and chaos that will leave few survivors and fewer records. The comfortable certainties of the ancient world are crumbling, and from their ruins will emerge a new age, darker and more dangerous than anything the pharaohs of old could have imagined. Let your mind drift now to a place not found in guidebooks or preserved in tourist photographs. A place once whispered about by Greek historians, scribbled into scrolls by curious scribes, and eventually buried by both earth and forgetfulness. Tonight, we walk the imagined halls of a building that may have existed, or perhaps only half existed, never fully discovered, never fully denied. This is the enigma of the Labyrinth of Amenemhat III. Picture, if you will, the moment when ancient travelers first glimpsed what they would later describe as impossible. The year is somewhere around 450 BCE, and a Greek merchant's caravan has just crested a low hill in the Fayum region of Egypt. The air shimmers with heat, and the ground beneath their feet is hard-packed earth, mixed with fragments of limestone and pottery. But there, rising from the desert floor like a fever dream made manifest, stands something that defies their understanding of architecture, of space, of what human hands can build. It begins with a man, a pharaoh of the Middle Kingdom, Amenemhat III. He ruled not with theatrical flair, but with measured strength, a stabilizer of borders, a builder of fortresses, and a reformer of irrigation. His reign, lasting 39 years from approximately 1860 to 1814 BCE, represented the golden twilight of Egypt's Middle Kingdom, a time when the nation's power was consolidating rather than expanding, when wisdom was valued over conquest, and when monumental building projects served not just royal ego, but sophisticated religious and administrative purposes. Amenemhat III inherited a kingdom that had been carefully cultivated by his predecessors. His father, Senusert III, had pushed Egypt's southern border to the Third Cataract and established a series of mighty fortresses in Nubia. But where his father had been a warrior pharaoh, Amenemhat III became something perhaps more valuable, a steward. He understood that true power lay not just in conquering territory, but in making it productive, not just in building walls, but in channeling water, not just in commanding armies, but in feeding populations. The Fayum region, that curious depression southwest of Memphis, where the Nile's floodwaters collected in what the Greeks would later call Lake Moeris, became his masterpiece of engineering. Here, Amenemhat III didn't just build monuments. He reshaped the very landscape. His engineers constructed a complex system of canals, dikes, and regulatory works that transformed seasonal flooding into year-round agricultural abundance. They created what was essentially a giant irrigation machine, turning thousands of acres of marsh and desert into fertile farmland that could feed not just Egypt, but its growing trade networks throughout the eastern Mediterranean. But perhaps his most haunting legacy was the monument said to rival the pyramids in grandeur, a building called by ancient travelers a marvel beyond all marvels, and yet lost to time. The structure that would become known as the Labyrinth was not conceived as a simple tomb or temple, but as something far more ambitious, a cosmic microcosm, a stone representation of the afterlife itself, a place where the living could walk among chambers that mirrored the halls of the dead. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote of it in awed tones. When he visited Egypt around 450 BCE, already 1,000 years after Amenemhat III's death, the structure still stood in sufficient glory to overwhelm him completely. His description, preserved in the second book of his histories, reads like the fevered dream of a man who has seen something that challenges his very conception of what architecture can accomplish. He described thousands of chambers, some above ground, some below, not hundreds, not dozens, but thousands. Rooms filled with columns that rose like stone forests, courts that opened onto other courts in endless succession, and corridors that twisted and turned until even the initiated lost their bearings. The upper level, he claimed, contained 1,500 rooms, while the underground level contained an equal number. The Egyptian priests, he noted, would not allow him to enter the subterranean chambers, claiming they contained the tombs of the pharaohs who built the structure and the sacred crocodiles of Sobek. But Herodotus was not content with simple description. He attempted to convey the sheer, overwhelming nature of the experience. The way morning light filtered through stone screens and cast moving shadows on walls covered with hieroglyphs. The sound of footsteps echoing in chambers so vast that voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The disorienting effect of walking through rooms that appeared to repeat themselves, yet were never quite the same. The sensation of being simultaneously enclosed and infinite, of being in a building that seemed to exist both in the physical world and in some realm beyond normal space. He claimed it stood near the city of Crocodilopolis, at the edge of Lake Moeris, where the priests of Sobek kept their sacred animals and the water shimmered like bronze beneath the sun. This location was no accident. Sobek, the crocodile god, was the patron deity of the Fayum region, and his worship was intimately connected with the life-giving properties of water. The crocodiles themselves were seen as living manifestations of the god, creatures that could survive both on land and in water, bridging the worlds of the living and the dead, just as the pharaoh himself was expected to do. The lake itself was a marvel of engineering, a vast reservoir that collected the Nile's floodwaters and released them gradually throughout the year. Its shores were lined with temples and administrative buildings, workshops and granaries, creating a religious and economic complex that served as the beating heart of Middle Kingdom Egypt's agricultural revolution. To place the labyrinth here was to position it at the center of both spiritual and material power, a monument that would be visible to anyone traveling through this vital region. But Herodotus wasn't alone in his amazement. Later historians, Pliny the Elder and Diodorus Siculus, also mentioned the structure, each adding details that both clarified and confused the picture. Pliny, writing in the 1st century CE, provided more precise measurements and architectural details. He described it as covering an area larger than the Great Pyramid's base, with walls 40 feet high and passages so intricate that a guide was essential to prevent visitors from becoming permanently lost. Diodorus Siculus, writing in the 1st century BCE, offered a different perspective. He emphasized the structure's role as an administrative center, describing vast halls where the pharaoh held court, archives where records were kept, and chambers where the complex business of governing an empire was conducted. His description suggests something more like a vast governmental complex than a purely religious monument, a place where the practical and the sacred intermingled in ways that would have been natural to ancient Egyptian thinking. Yet each ancient source also added their own confusion to the picture. Pliny claimed the structure had been built by multiple pharaohs over several generations. Diodorus suggested it had been constructed as a tomb for a legendary king named Moeris, after whom the lake was named. Later Byzantine and Arab historians added their own details, some clearly fantastic, others tantalizingly specific. The structure became a palimpsest of descriptions, each writer adding their own layer of interpretation to accounts that may themselves have been based on increasingly distant memories. And yet, when archaeologists combed the Fayum region centuries later, they found almost nothing. The great expeditions of the 19th and early 20th centuries, armed with the latest techniques and technologies, discovered no endless chambers, no multi-level palace that could accommodate thousands of rooms. Instead, they found scattered limestone blocks, sun-baked fragments of decorated stone, and the low mound of a ruined temple near the modern village of Hawara. The disappointment was profound. Flinders Petrie, the great British Egyptologist who excavated the site in 1888 and 1889, found clear evidence of a substantial mortuary temple attached to Amenemhat III's pyramid. The structure he uncovered was certainly impressive, with thick walls, multiple chambers, and elaborate decorative elements. But it was nothing like the vast complex described by ancient historians. The ground plan suggested a building, perhaps 300 feet long and 250 feet wide, substantial by any measure, but hardly the city-sized complex that Herodotus had described. Some scholars suggested that the ancient writers had been describing multiple buildings as if they were one, or that they had conflated the temple with nearby administrative buildings, storage facilities, and residential quarters to create the impression of a single vast structure. Others proposed that the building had been so thoroughly quarried for stone by later dynasties that only its foundations remained, leaving archaeologists to puzzle over fragments of what had once been a complete architectural marvel. The quarrying theory gained particular credence when investigators discovered that many of the stone blocks used in Ptolemaic and Roman period buildings throughout the Fayum region showed clear signs of having been recycled from earlier structures. The limestone blocks were often carved with Middle Kingdom hieroglyphs and decorative motifs, suggesting they had been salvaged from dismantled temples and monuments. If the labyrinth had indeed been as vast as ancient sources suggested, it would have represented an enormous repository of high-quality building stone, too valuable to leave unused in later periods when Egypt's economy was less robust. But other scholars remained skeptical of the complete dismissal of ancient accounts. They pointed out that Egyptian temple complexes were often much larger than their stone foundations might suggest, incorporating courtyards, gardens, administrative buildings, storage facilities, and residential quarters built from mud brick that would leave little archaeological trace. The stone temple at the center might be only the most durable part of a much larger complex, like the stone heart of a vast organism whose softer tissues had long since decayed. Moreover, the ancient accounts were remarkably consistent in certain details despite being written by authors separated by centuries and coming from different cultural backgrounds. All described a structure near Lake Morris. All mentioned its association with crocodile worship. All emphasized its labyrinthine character, and all conveyed a sense of overwhelming scale and complexity. Such consistency across independent sources suggested that they were describing something real, even if their descriptions had been filtered through cultural expectations and literary conventions that emphasized the marvelous and extraordinary. The mystery deepened when archaeologists made a series of intriguing discoveries beneath the temple ruins. Using ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive techniques, they detected what appeared to be a complex network of subterranean chambers extending far beyond the footprint of the visible ruins. These underground spaces appeared to be sealed, and remarkably, many of them were flooded with water that had apparently been there for centuries. The presence of underground water was particularly intriguing because it seemed to confirm Herodotus's account of subterranean chambers that the priests claimed contained the tombs of pharaohs and sacred crocodiles. The flooding itself might explain why these chambers had never been properly explored. Even modern technology struggles with archaeological investigation in waterlogged conditions. and the risk of damaging whatever artifacts might be preserved in the underground chambers has made excavation extremely cautious and limited. Some recent investigations have used underwater robots to explore small portions of these flooded chambers, revealing tantalizing glimpses of carved walls and what appear to be architectural features consistent with Middle Kingdom construction techniques. But the full extent and contents of these underground spaces remain unknown, protected by water and time from the curiosity of modern investigators. The question of what exactly the labyrinth was intended to be has generated numerous theories, each attempting to reconcile the ancient accounts with the archaeological evidence. Some scholars propose that it was primarily a mortuary complex, designed not just for Amenemhat III, but as a dynastic burial ground for the entire 12th dynasty. The complexity described by ancient sources might reflect the accommodation of multiple royal burials, each with their own chambers, corridors, and ritual spaces. Others suggest that the structure was conceived as a cosmic map, a three-dimensional representation of the Egyptian understanding of the afterlife. Egyptian religious texts describe the afterlife as a complex landscape of halls, chambers, gates, and waterways that the deceased must navigate to reach eternal life. The labyrinth might have been designed as a physical manifestation of this spiritual geography, a place where priests could perform rituals that symbolically guided the dead through their journey to resurrection. A third theory proposes that the structure was primarily administrative, a vast governmental complex that housed the bureaucracy necessary to manage Egypt's increasingly complex state. The Middle Kingdom saw a significant expansion in record-keeping, taxation, and resource management, requiring large numbers of scribes, administrators, and storage facilities. The thousands of chambers described by ancient sources might have been offices, archives, storerooms, and meeting halls necessary for the efficient administration of the kingdom. Perhaps most intriguingly, some scholars suggest that the labyrinth was designed to serve all these functions simultaneously, reflecting the Egyptian understanding that royal, religious, and administrative authority were inseparable aspects of the same divine kingship. The structure might have been conceived as a microcosm of the kingdom itself, a place where the pharaoh could simultaneously rule the living, commune with the dead, and embody the cosmic order that maintained the universe's stability. The architectural techniques necessary to create such a complex would have pushed Middle Kingdom engineering to its limits. Ancient Egyptian builders were masters of post and lintel construction, creating vast halls supported by forests of columns, but the kind of intricate, interconnected spaces described by ancient sources would have required sophisticated planning and unprecedented organizational skills. The logistics alone of coordinating the work of thousands of craftsmen, managing the transportation of enormous quantities of stone, and maintaining consistency across what may have been decades of construction would have been staggering. Yet the Middle Kingdom Egyptians had already demonstrated their capacity for such ambitious projects. The fortresses of Nubia, the irrigation systems of the Fayum, and the administrative apparatus that managed trade networks stretching from Nubia to the Levant all testified to their organizational sophistication. The labyrinth, if it existed as described, would have been the culmination of these capabilities, a monument to the state's ability to mobilize resources and coordinate complex projects. The religious significance of the structure cannot be separated from its political and administrative functions. Sobek, the crocodile god whose cult was centered in the Fayum, was associated not just with the life-giving properties of water, but with royal power and the pharaoh's role as protector of the kingdom. Crocodiles were seen as embodiments of primal power, creatures that could survive in both aquatic and terrestrial environments, making them perfect symbols for a pharaoh who needed to navigate both the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The labyrinth's location on the shores of Lake Morris would have made it a focal point for pilgrimages and festivals associated with Sobek worship. Ancient Egyptian religious practice often involved elaborate processions in which the statues of gods were carried from temple to temple, allowing different communities to participate in religious ceremonies. A structure as complex as the Labyrinth would have provided numerous venues for such ceremonies, with different chambers and corridors serving specific ritual functions. The flooding of the underground chambers adds another layer of religious symbolism. In Egyptian cosmology, the primordial waters of chaos, personified by the god Nun, were the source from which all life emerged and to which it would eventually return. Temples often incorporated sacred pools or wells that symbolically connected the structure to these primordial waters. If the labyrinth's underground chambers were intentionally designed to be flooded, they might have represented a direct connection to the cosmic waters of creation, making the entire structure a bridge between the ordered world of the living and the chaotic realm of potential that lay beneath all existence. The question of why such an elaborate structure would have been completely lost to history remains puzzling. Egyptian monuments were typically built to last for eternity, constructed from the most durable materials available, and designed to withstand the passage of millennia. The pyramids of Giza, built more than 1,000 years before Amenemhat III's time, still dominate the landscape today. Why would a structure that ancient sources described as rivaling the pyramids in grandeur leave so little trace? Part of the answer may lie in the materials used and the changing political circumstances of later periods. While the pyramids were built primarily from massive limestone blocks that were difficult to move and reuse, temple complexes often incorporated more manageable stone elements that could be more easily recycled. The economic pressures of later periods, when Egypt was frequently under foreign rule and resources were scarce, would have made the systematic quarrying of abandoned monuments almost inevitable. The location of the structure may also have contributed to its disappearance. Unlike the pyramids, which were built on high ground in desert areas where they were relatively protected from human interference, the labyrinth was located in the Fayum, a region that remained densely populated and agriculturally productive throughout Egyptian history. The pressure to reuse building materials would have been much greater in such an area, and the gradual expansion of agricultural land might have gradually encroached on and eventually covered the ruins. Climate change may have played a role as well. The level of Lake Moeris fluctuated significantly over the centuries, influenced by changes in the Nile's flood patterns and human modifications to the regional water management system. During periods when the lake expanded, parts of the labyrinth complex might have been flooded, weakening foundations and making the structure more vulnerable to collapse and abandonment. The mystery persists precisely because it represents something larger than a simple archaeological puzzle. The labyrinth has become a symbol of all the knowledge that has been lost to time, all the achievements that have been forgotten, all the wonders that once existed but now survive only in fragmentary accounts and disputed memories. It represents the gap between what we know and what we can prove, between the stories that come down to us and the physical evidence we can examine. Modern attempts to solve the mystery have employed increasingly sophisticated techniques. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed subsurface anomalies that suggest the presence of buried structures far more extensive than the visible ruins. Satellite imagery has identified geometric patterns in the landscape that might represent the outlines of ancient buildings. Underwater archaeology in the flooded chambers has begun to yield tantalizing hints of carved walls and architectural features. But each new technique raises as many questions as it answers. The subsurface anomalies might represent ancient structures, or they might be natural geological features or the remains of later constructions. The geometric patterns visible from satellite imagery might mark the boundaries of the ancient labyrinth, or they might reflect more recent agricultural or industrial activities. The underwater discoveries, while intriguing, remain too limited to provide a comprehensive picture of what lies beneath the surface. The scientific challenges of investigating the site are compounded by political and practical considerations. Egypt's archaeological resources are limited, and the government must balance the desire to investigate important sites like the Labyrinth against the need to protect and preserve the country's many other archaeological treasures. The Fayum region remains agriculturally productive, and any large-scale excavation would need to take into account the economic impact on local communities who depend on the land for their livelihood. International cooperation in archaeological investigation brings its own complications. While foreign expertise and funding can make ambitious projects possible, they also raise questions about who controls the research agenda and who benefits from whatever discoveries might be made. The history of Egyptian archaeology is filled with examples of foreign archaeologists removing artifacts and information from the country, and modern Egypt is understandably cautious about repeating such experiences. Yet the appeal of the mystery continues to draw researchers from around the world. The possibility that beneath the fields and villages of the modern Fayum lie the remains of one of the ancient world's most remarkable architectural achievements is too tantalizing to ignore. Each new generation of archaeologists brings new techniques and new perspectives to the investigation, gradually building a more complete picture of what the labyrinth might have been. The story of the labyrinth also reflects broader questions about how we understand and interpret the past. Ancient sources often described monuments and achievements in terms that seem exaggerated or impossible to modern readers. Rather than dismissing such accounts as purely fictional, many scholars now recognize that they might reflect genuine experiences filtered through different cultural expectations and literary conventions. Ancient travelers encountering a large and complex building might naturally describe it in terms that emphasized its most remarkable and disorienting features. A mortuary temple with 50 chambers might be described as having hundreds. A building that took an hour to walk through might be characterized as requiring a full day to explore. Such descriptions wouldn't be deliberately false, but they would reflect the emotional and psychological impact of the experience, rather than precise architectural measurements. The labyrinth thus becomes a case study in the challenges of reconciling ancient texts with archaeological evidence. Neither source of information is complete or entirely reliable on its own, but together they create a picture that is richer and more complex than either could provide alone. The archaeological evidence grounds the ancient accounts in physical reality, while the textual sources provide context and meaning that pure archaeology cannot supply. This interpretive challenge is particularly acute in Egyptian archaeology, where the culture's emphasis on symbolic and religious meaning often makes it difficult to separate literal from metaphorical description. Egyptian art and literature frequently used metaphor and symbol to convey ideas that cannot be expressed through simple realistic representation. A building described as having thousands of chambers might be literally accurate, or it might be using numerical symbolism to convey the idea of completeness or infinity. The ongoing mystery of the labyrinth has also become part of popular culture, inspiring novels, films, and television programs that explore the romantic appeal of lost civilizations and hidden treasures. These popular treatments often emphasize the adventure and mystery aspects of the story while downplaying the methodical, scientific nature of actual archaeological investigation. But they also serve to maintain public interest in the site and in Egyptian archaeology more generally, potentially generating support for the long-term research that will be necessary to resolve the mystery. The economic dimensions of the labyrinth mystery cannot be ignored either. Egypt's tourism industry depends heavily on the country's archaeological attractions, and the discovery of a major new site could provide significant economic benefits. The possibility that the labyrinth might be recovered and open to visitors creates pressure for rapid investigation and development, but also raises concerns about the potential impact of tourism on whatever archaeological remains might be discovered. As night falls over the Fayum today, and the winds whisper along the dry ground, one can almost imagine it again. The cool halls, the flicker of torchlight on polished walls, the sound of sandals echoing in chambers no longer seen. The landscape itself seems to hold memories. The way certain places retain the imprint of human activity long after the visible traces have disappeared. The farmers who work the fields speak of finding carved stones while plowing, of places where the earth feels different underfoot, of dreams that come to those who sleep in certain spots. Perhaps the truth of the labyrinth lies not in any single archaeological discovery, but in the accumulation of evidence, testimony, and memory across the centuries. Perhaps it exists in the space between what we can prove and what we can imagine, in the recognition that the past was both more complex and more mysterious than our modern scientific methods can fully capture. The labyrinth reminds us that even when we dig, we may only find the edges of the truth. That sometimes what we seek in history isn't always what we uncover, but the act of looking still leaves a trace, a pattern, a possibility. The flooded chambers beneath Hawara continue to guard their secrets, patient and silent in their underwater darkness. Modern technology may eventually allow us to explore them fully, to map their extent and catalog their contents. We may discover that they contain the remains of the lost labyrinth, or we may find that they are something else entirely, equally mysterious, but different from what the ancient sources led us to expect. But until that day of discovery arrives, the labyrinth of Amenemhat III remains what it has always been, a testament to the power of human imagination and ambition, a reminder that the past contains wonders we have not yet understood, and a challenge to our assumption that we can fully comprehend the achievements of those who came before us. It stands as proof that mystery itself has value, that not everything must be explained to be meaningful, and that sometimes the most important discoveries are the ones that teach us how much we still have to learn. The story of the labyrinth flows like water through time, connecting the reign of a Middle Kingdom pharaoh to the curiosity of Greek historians. From the methodical investigations of modern archaeologists to the dreams of those who still believe that somewhere beneath the ordinary surface of the modern world, extraordinary things lie waiting to be rediscovered. And as our journey through these ancient mysteries continues, we turn from the flooded chambers of Egypt to another place where water and stone conspire to hide the truth, where the very ground beneath our feet may conceal secrets that could reshape our understanding of how civilizations rise, flourish, and sometimes vanish without trace, leaving only whispers and legends to mark their passing. Let us descend now slowly, carefully beneath the surface of the earth. The air grows cooler, the stone grows smoother, the light dims, and what was once ceremony and sun becomes shadow and silence. You are entering a royal tomb, not as an archaeologist, not as a looter, and not as a tourist, but as a quiet observer. To understand not the treasures or myths, but the mood, the sensation, the stillness. The journey begins in the Valley of the Kings, where the wind whips between rock faces and vultures circle lazily overhead. Here, in this desolate amphitheater of limestone cliffs, the ancient Egyptians chose to hide their greatest treasures and their most profound mysteries. The landscape itself seems hostile to life, yet it was precisely this hostility that made it perfect for death. The harsh sun bleaches everything to bone white during the day, while the nights bring a cold so sharp it seems to cut through flesh itself. This is not accidental. The Egyptians understood that death required a different geography than life, a place where the normal rules of human comfort and convenience no longer applied. The entrances to the tombs are hidden, disguised as natural faults in the cliffs, or sealed so tightly that even time seems to overlook them. Some openings are no larger than a person's torso, requiring visitors to crawl on hands and knees through passages that seem to compress with each breath. Others begin with steps carved directly into the living rock, descending at angles that force the body to lean forward, as if bowing to unseen forces below. The ancient architects planned these approaches deliberately. They wanted the living to feel discomfort, to sense immediately that they were crossing a threshold into a realm where human sensibilities no longer governed. But once uncovered, these paths stretch deep into the earth-angled corridors, carefully measured shafts, and chambers cut with almost mathematical precision. The construction itself tells a story of obsession and devotion that spans decades. Teams of workers, operating in shifts around the clock, carved through solid limestone with copper tools that dulled after hours of use. They worked by the light of oil lamps that filled the narrow spaces with smoke and heat, creating an atmosphere so stifling that workers could only labor for short periods before needing to surface for air. The precision of these tunnels reveals the sophisticated understanding of engineering that the ancient Egyptians possessed. Every angle was calculated not just for structural integrity, but for symbolic meaning. The corridors descend at specific degrees that mirror the path of the sun through the underworld, while the ceiling heights correspond to sacred measurements derived from the human body and celestial observations. Nothing was arbitrary. Every chisel mark carried intention. At first, you are met with painted walls. Not chaotic or rushed, but methodical scenes from the Amduat and the Book of Gates, elaborate guides through the underworld. These are not mere decorations, but detailed roadmaps for the soul's journey after death. Each scene depicts specific challenges the deceased pharaoh would face. Rivers of fire to cross, demons to appease, gates guarded by fearsome creatures with names like Swallower of Shadows and He Who Lives on Blood. The paintings function as both instruction manual and protective spell, ensuring that the king would recognize the dangers ahead and speak the proper words to overcome them. The artisans who created these masterpieces worked in teams, each specializing in different aspects of the composition. The master painters sketched the initial outlines, working from memory and established conventions that had been passed down through generations. Junior artists filled in the base colors, while specialists added the intricate details that brought each figure to life. The process could take years for a single chamber, with artists returning day after day to perfect their work in the flickering lamplight. Gods with jackal heads, sun discs, and serpents seemed to move in procession, each figure painted with a kind of care that suggests this was not merely decoration, but protection. The god Anubis, with his distinctive canine features, appears repeatedly throughout these scenes, his role as guide and protector of the dead making him essential to the tomb's spiritual function. The serpent Apep, eternal enemy of the sun god Ra, writhes across walls and scenes depicting the nightly battle between light and darkness. These are not abstract concepts, but vivid, immediate presences that the ancient Egyptians believed possessed real power. The colors are earthy but vivid: ochre, black, lapis blue, and faded gold. The figures seem to float in the flicker of oil lamps, shadows dancing over divine eyes. The ochre came from iron-rich clay deposits along the Nile, ground to powder and mixed with water and plant gums to create a paint that would adhere to the limestone walls. The lapis blue, more precious than gold, was imported from Afghanistan through trade networks that spanned continents. This brilliant blue, the color of the night sky and the hair of the gods, was reserved for the most sacred elements of the paintings. The gold, applied in thin sheets or mixed with binders to create paint, caught and reflected the lamp flames, creating an effect that made the painted figures seem to glow with inner light. The artistic style itself follows conventions that had remained unchanged for centuries. Figures are depicted in composite view, with heads in profile but eyes frontal, torsos facing forward but legs in profile. This was not artistic limitation, but theological necessity. The composite view is believed to show each part of the body from its most characteristic and powerful angle, ensuring that the painted figures possessed maximum spiritual potency. But the deeper you go, the less adorned things become. This transition from elaborate decoration to stark simplicity reflects the journey from the world of the living to the realm of the dead. The painted scenes serve as a bridge between these two worlds, gradually preparing the visitor for the ultimate reality of death itself. As you move deeper into the tomb, the walls become smoother, more austere, as if the spiritual journey requires the stripping away of earthly concerns and distractions. The last chambers are often bare. Smooth walls, dust-coated floors. These were not places meant for the living. The absence of decoration in these final rooms is not neglect, but intention. Here, in the most sacred spaces of the tomb. The ancient Egyptians believed that elaborate paintings would be superfluous, even disrespectful. The king's journey through death had reached its culmination, and in this ultimate space, only silence and simplicity were appropriate. No flowers here, no music, only weight. The weight of stone, of memory, and of ritual. The stone overhead, millions of tons of limestone and bedrock, creates a pressure that you can feel in your chest, a constant reminder of how far you have traveled from the world of light and air above. The memory pressed into these walls includes not just the pharaoh's reign, but the accumulated hopes and fears of an entire civilization. The ritual weight comes from the knowledge that every object, every painted symbol, every carved hieroglyph was placed here according to ceremonies that took weeks to complete and involved hundreds of participants. And the scent musty, sharp, earthy, the residue of ancient resins and the slow decay of sealed air. The tomb may be dry, but time still seeps in. The resins, imported from far-off lands at enormous expense, were burned during the burial ceremonies, and their smoke became trapped in the sealed chambers, creating a permanent perfume of myrrh, frankincense, and natron. These scents, once associated with divinity and purification, now carry undertones of decay and abandonment. The air itself, sealed for millennia, has taken on qualities that human lungs were never meant to process, creating a sensation of breathing liquid rather than gas. The dryness of the tomb is both blessing and curse. The lack of moisture has preserved many organic materials that would have long since rotted in more humid climates. But it has also created an environment so desiccated that it seems to draw moisture from living tissue. Visitors often find their throats becoming parched within minutes, their skin beginning to feel tight and uncomfortable. This is the desert claiming its due, asserting its dominion over all who enter this underground realm. Bats roost silently in corners, and sand creeps in through cracks too small for sight. The bats, descendants of creatures that may have first entered the tomb shortly after its sealing, represent the only ongoing life in these spaces. They emerge at night to hunt in the valley above, then return to hang in the tomb's darkness, their presence a reminder that even in death, life finds a way to persist. The sand infiltration is more subtle, but equally persistent. Despite the best efforts of ancient architects to create perfect seals, the desert always finds a way in. Grain by grain, year by year, the sand accumulates in corners and crevices, slowly reclaiming the carved spaces for the natural world. In these chambers, the royal body was placed not just as a corpse, but as a vessel for eternity. The transformation of the pharaoh from living ruler to eternal god began long before death, with elaborate preparations that could span years. The location of the burial chamber within the tomb complex was chosen according to astronomical calculations, ensuring that the king's body would rest in perfect alignment with celestial events that would occur centuries in the future. The chamber itself was oriented to face the rising sun, symbolically connecting the deceased pharaoh with the daily rebirth of Re. The mummification process, which preceded the tomb placement, was itself a transformation that turned the physical body into a sacred object. The removal of organs, the desiccation with natron salts, the wrapping in hundreds of yards of linen, and the application of protective amulets created something that was no longer entirely human. The mummy was a carefully constructed artifact designed to serve as a permanent dwelling place for the pharaoh's ka, or spiritual double. A sarcophagus, carved from quartzite or granite, rests like an altar. These massive stone containers, sometimes weighing several tons, were carved from single blocks of the hardest stone available. Quartzite, with its rose and gold coloring, was quarried from sites hundreds of miles away and transported to the Valley of the Kings through a logistical operation that required the coordination of thousands of workers. The granite, even harder and more difficult to work, was valued for its symbolic associations with permanence and divine power. The carving of a royal sarcophagus represented the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian stoneworking techniques. Artisans used copper tools, sand abrasives, and patient, methodical techniques to hollow out the interior and shape the exterior surfaces. The process could take years, with multiple craftsmen working in shifts to maintain the precise tolerances required. Many sarcophagi feature internal chambers carved to exactly match the shape of the nested coffins they would contain, creating a perfect fit that allowed no movement or shifting of the precious contents. Around it, amulets, food jars, furniture folded to fit, model boats, canopic chests, and ritual tools. The arrangement of these burial goods followed strict protocols that had been refined over centuries. The amulets, carved from precious stones and metals, were placed according to their specific protective properties. The heart scarab, made from green stone, was positioned over the mummy's chest to ensure that the deceased's heart would speak favorably during the judgment of the dead. The jed pillar amulets, representing stability and endurance, were placed at strategic points around the body. The food jars contained provisions for the afterlife journey: bread, beer, meat, fruits, and vegetables that had been ritually prepared and blessed by priests. These offerings were not merely symbolic, but were believed to provide actual sustenance for the deceased's spiritual body. Some jars contained exotic delicacies that had been imported from distant lands, demonstrating the pharaoh's continued access to luxury, even in death. The furniture, designed specifically for tomb use, often featured folding or collapsible elements that allowed elaborate pieces to fit through narrow corridors. Chairs, beds, chests, and tables were crafted from the finest woods and decorated with gold, ivory, and precious stones. These pieces were not merely functional, but served as symbols of the pharaoh's continued royal status in the afterlife. Model boats, essential for the journey through the underworld, were crafted with meticulous attention to detail. These vessels, ranging from simple reed boats to elaborate solar barks, represented the various modes of transportation the deceased pharaoh would need to navigate the waters of the afterlife. Some boats were equipped with tiny crews of servant figures, while others carried miniature versions of royal regalia and ceremonial objects. The canopic chests, containing the pharaoh's preserved organs, were protected by the 4 sons of Horus, each responsible for guarding a specific organ. The liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines, removed during mummification, were individually wrapped and placed in canopic jars topped with carved heads representing protective deities. These organs, believed to be necessary for the afterlife, were treated with the same care and reverence as the body itself. But also traps, false doors, hidden niches, sometimes pits designed to confuse or deter. Because tombs were not just sacred, they were threatened, not by curses, but by desperation. The architects of royal tombs understood that their creations would inevitably attract the attention of those seeking to profit from the wealth buried within. The elaborate security measures built into tomb design reflect a pragmatic understanding of human nature and the economic realities of ancient Egypt. False doors, carved to look like actual entrances, were designed to mislead tomb robbers into wasting time and effort on passages that led nowhere. These decoy entrances often featured the same architectural details as genuine doorways, complete with carved lintels and threshold stones. Some false doors even included partially excavated passages that ended abruptly in solid rock, creating the impression that the construction had been abandoned or that the true entrance lay elsewhere. Hidden niches, concealed behind false walls or camouflaged within decorative elements, provided secure storage for the most valuable burial goods. These spaces, often no larger than modern safes, were sealed with stone plugs that matched the surrounding wall surface so perfectly that they became invisible once the mortar dried. The location of these niches was known only to the architects and the highest-ranking priests involved in the burial ceremony. The pits, sometimes called robbers' traps, were excavated at strategic points along the tomb's main passages. These deep holes, covered with thin stone slabs and disguised with sand or debris, were designed to injure or delay intruders. While not typically deep enough to be fatal, they could easily break bones or trap individuals until they could be discovered by tomb guards. The psychological effect of these traps was often as important as their physical danger, creating an atmosphere of risk and uncertainty that discouraged casual exploration. The threat that necessitated these security measures came not from supernatural curses, but from very real economic pressures. The wealth buried in royal tombs represented fortunes that could support entire families for generations. During times of economic hardship, political instability, or foreign invasion, the temptation to raid these underground treasuries became irresistible. Even in antiquity, tomb robbing was a recognized profession, with specialized tools and techniques passed down through criminal networks. Despite the grandeur, the space was suffocating. Workers, perhaps dozens of them, carved these rooms in flickering light, breathing stone dust for years. The working conditions inside the tomb construction sites were harsh beyond modern imagination. The narrow passages, often less than 6 feet high and barely wide enough for 2 men to pass, trapped the heat generated by oil lamps and human bodies. The air, already thin due to the depth below ground, became further depleted by the burning of lamp oil and the respiration of many workers laboring in close quarters. The stone dust, created by the constant chiseling and carving, filled the air with particles that irritated eyes, throats, and lungs. Workers frequently developed respiratory problems that would plague them for the rest of their lives. The dust settled on everything: tools, food, clothing, and skin, creating a perpetual coating that marked tomb workers as a distinct class within Egyptian society. The lighting, provided entirely by oil lamps and torches, created additional hazards. The flames consumed oxygen, generated heat, and produced smoke that had no easy escape route. Workers had to be constantly aware of their flame sources, as a dropped lamp could easily start a fire that would spread rapidly through the narrow, wood-braced passages. The flickering light also made precise work difficult, forcing artisans to develop techniques for creating detailed carvings and paintings under conditions that would challenge even modern craftsmen. They left behind sketches, fragments of flint tools, and sometimes graffiti. Jokes scratched onto walls, names etched into corners, small remnants of life in a place built to silence it. These traces of the living workers provide some of the most human elements found in royal tombs. The sketches, often preliminary drawings for painted scenes, show the artist's thought processes and reveal how the elaborate tomb decorations evolved from simple concepts to finished masterpieces. The abandoned tools tell stories of daily work routines and the practical challenges of tomb construction. Broken chisels, worn grinding stones, and fragments of copper implements provide evidence of the intensive labor required to create these underground marvels. Some tools show modifications and repairs that speak to the resourcefulness of workers who had to maintain their equipment under difficult conditions. The graffiti, perhaps most poignantly, reveals the personalities and concerns of individuals whose names history has otherwise forgotten. Simple messages like "Amenemhat was here," or "the work goes slowly but surely," provide glimpses into the thoughts of men who spent years of their lives working in darkness to create monuments for kings they may never have seen. Some graffiti includes drawings of animals, people, or geometric patterns that seem to represent attempts to bring elements of the living world into the tomb environment. Occasionally, more elaborate graffiti tells stories or records events that occurred during construction. These informal records sometimes provide information about tomb construction that is not found in official documents, including details about work schedules, supply problems, and conflicts between different work crews. The process of burial itself was long and ritual-laden. Priests performed rites, chants echoed off walls, and incense swirled in the stale air. The burial ceremony represented the culmination of months or even years of preparation that began immediately upon the pharaoh's death. The ritual transformation of the deceased ruler into a god required the participation of dozens of priests, each with specialized knowledge of specific ceremonies and prayers. The mummy's journey to the tomb was itself a sacred procession that recreated the sun god's nightly voyage through the underworld. The funeral cortege, including priests, mourners, and servants carrying burial goods, would wind through the Valley of the Kings, following routes that had been planned according to astronomical calculations and religious requirements. Once inside the tomb, the placement of the mummy and burial goods followed precise protocols that had been established over centuries. Every object had a designated location, and every location had spiritual significance. The process could take days to complete, with different groups of priests responsible for different aspects of the ceremony. The chants and prayers, performed in ancient Egyptian sacred language that was already archaic by the time of the New Kingdom, created an acoustic environment that enhanced the spiritual power of the ceremonies. The stone walls of the tomb acted as resonance chambers, amplifying and prolonging the sound of human voices in ways that created an otherworldly atmosphere. The priests understood these acoustic properties and designed their ceremonies to take advantage of the tomb's unique sound characteristics. The incense, burned in special braziers designed for use in enclosed spaces, served both practical and spiritual purposes. The aromatic smoke helped mask the odors associated with mummification and burial, while creating a sensory environment that was believed to attract the attention of the gods. Different types of incense were used for different parts of the ceremony, the most precious resins reserved for the most sacred moments. Once the rituals ended, the tomb was sealed, sometimes buried in rubble, sometimes hidden with great effort, as if obscurity itself was part of the protection. The sealing of the tomb marked the end of the pharaoh's earthly existence and the beginning of his eternal life as a god. The methods used to seal tombs varied depending on the specific security concerns and the resources available at the time of burial. Some tombs were sealed with massive stone blocks that were fitted into place with such precision that they seemed to become part of the natural rock formation. These blocks, weighing several tons each, required sophisticated engineering techniques to position and secure. The joints between blocks were often filled with mortar and then disguised to make them invisible to casual observation. Other tombs were concealed by being buried under tons of rubble and debris. Work crews would spend weeks filling in the entrance passages and covering all traces of the tomb's existence. The disturbed area would then be carefully landscaped to match the surrounding terrain, making it appear that no excavation had ever taken place. The most elaborate concealment efforts involved the creation of false burial sites designed to attract the attention of potential tomb robbers while protecting the actual burial location. These decoy tombs, sometimes called shadow tombs, could be nearly as elaborate as the real thing, complete with painted walls and burial chambers containing objects designed to appear valuable but actually made from cheaper materials. And then the stillness. Year after year, century after century, the silence becomes thick, almost physical. This is not the mere absence of sound, but a presence in itself, a weight that seems to press against the eardrums and create its own form of sensation. The silence of a sealed tomb is unlike any other quiet that exists in the human experience. It is the silence of spaces that have been deliberately removed from the world of the living, places where sound itself seems to have been banished along with light and air. The acoustic properties of the tomb chambers contribute to this unique form of silence. The stone walls, carved smooth and sealed tight, create an environment where even the smallest sounds become amplified and distorted. A whisper can seem to carry for great distances, while footsteps echo with an intensity that makes them seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The effect is disorienting and contributes to the sense that the tomb exists outside normal space and time. Rodents may scurry in, or mold may find a damp patch, but largely the tombs sleep. The occasional intrusions of living creatures serve only to emphasize the tomb's essential lifelessness. The rodents, usually small desert mice or bats, find their way in through cracks and openings that human eyes cannot detect. Their presence is temporary and furtive, as if they too sense that they are trespassing in a realm where they do not belong. The mold, when it appears, represents a form of life so basic that it barely qualifies as living. These simple organisms, feeding on minute traces of organic matter left behind by the ancient burial ceremonies, create patterns on walls and artifacts that seem almost like messages from the tomb itself. The appearance of mold often signals changes in the tomb's environment that may threaten the preservation of its contents. The kings inside are no longer men. They are symbols, quiet hopes carved in stone. They represent order in chaos, rebirth in finality. The transformation from living ruler to eternal symbol is one of the most profound aspects of ancient Egyptian royal burial practices. The mummy, wrapped in its layers of linen and enclosed in its nested coffins, becomes an object that transcends individual human identity to embody the eternal principles of divine kingship. The physical form of the mummy, standardized through centuries of mummification practice, makes individual pharaohs virtually indistinguishable from one another in death. This standardization was intentional, representing the belief that death erased individual characteristics in favor of universal divine attributes. The mummy becomes a vessel for the office of kingship rather than a memorial to a particular person. The surrounding burial goods, while often personalized with the pharaoh's names and titles, also serve to reinforce the symbolic nature of the burial. The objects represent not the individual preferences of the deceased ruler, but the traditional equipment required for divine kingship in the afterlife. The king's personal identity becomes subsumed into the larger role of maintaining cosmic order and ensuring the continuation of divine rule. And yet, not all tombs remain untouched. Over time, the seals crack. The outer corridors collapse. Grave robbers find their way in some ancient, some modern, seeking not stories, but goods. The violation of royal tombs represents one of the most persistent themes in Egyptian history, beginning in antiquity and continuing to the present day. The robbers came from all levels of society. Desperate peasants seeking to survive famines, corrupt officials exploiting their positions, organized criminal gangs, and in modern times, professional antiquities dealers serving international markets. The ancient tomb robbers often possessed detailed knowledge of tomb construction and security measures, suggesting that some were former construction workers or individuals with inside information from tomb builders. They developed specialized tools and techniques for breaching sealed entrances, navigating trap systems, and extracting valuable objects efficiently. Some ancient papyri record the testimonies of captured tomb robbers, providing detailed accounts of their methods and motivations. The damage caused by tomb robbing extends far beyond the mere theft of valuable objects. The robbers focused on portable wealth, often destroyed larger artifacts that had no immediate commercial value. They scattered human remains, damaged painted walls, and disrupted the careful arrangements of burial goods that had been designed to serve specific spiritual purposes. Modern tomb robbing, often conducted with more sophisticated equipment and motivated by the international antiquities market, has sometimes caused even more extensive damage than ancient plundering. The use of explosives, power tools, and earth-moving equipment has destroyed archaeological contexts and eliminated the possibility of learning from the tomb's original arrangements. They break, they take, they scatter. But even these interruptions do not erase the mood of the tomb. That slow, heavy sense of timeless waiting. The resilience of the tomb's essential character in the face of human violation speaks to the power of the original conception. The architects and priests who designed these spaces understood that they were creating something that would endure not just physical assault, but the more subtle erosion of changing beliefs and cultural values. The mood of the tomb seems to exist independently of its contents. Even when stripped of their burial goods and disturbed by intrusions, the chambers retain their essential character as places set apart from the world of the living. The silence, the weight of stone, the sense of vast time, all persist regardless of human interference. This permanence of mood suggests that the tomb's power lies not in its material contents, but in its spatial and psychological design. The ancient architects created an environment that would continue to evoke specific emotional and spiritual responses, even when its original purpose was no longer understood or respected. Today, when you walk through one of these tombs, perhaps that of Ramses, or the faint chamber of a forgotten prince, you'll see more than just stone. The experience of entering a royal tomb in the present day carries layers of meaning that the original builders could not have anticipated. Modern visitors bring with them knowledge of history, archaeology, and comparative religion that creates new contexts for understanding these ancient spaces. The electric lighting now installed in many tombs reveals details that the original oil lamps could never have illuminated, but it also changes the fundamental character of the space. The harsh, even light eliminates the shadows and flickering effects that were integral to the tomb's original atmosphere. This steady illumination makes the painted figures seem static and lifeless, compared to how they would have appeared in the dancing light of flame. The presence of other tourists, guides, and security personnel introduces elements that are completely foreign to the tomb's design. These spaces were created for solitary encounters with death and eternity, not for group experiences or educational tours. The challenge for modern visitors is to find ways to connect with the tomb's original purpose despite these contemporary distractions. You'll feel the cold that no sunlight reaches. You'll hear the hum of quiet that speaks louder than history books. The physical sensations of the tomb environment remain remarkably consistent across centuries and millennia. The temperature, regulated by the massive thermal mass of the surrounding stone, creates a microclimate that exists independently of surface weather conditions. This cold is not merely the absence of heat, but a positive presence that seems to seep into bones and clothing. The quality of sound within the tomb creates an acoustic environment that heightens awareness of every small noise while simultaneously emphasizing the overwhelming silence. Footsteps, breathing, the rustle of clothing, all become magnified and take on significance they would never possess in normal environments. The stone surfaces create echoes and reverberations that make voices sound hollow and unnatural. These physical sensations combine to create a psychological state that is unlike anything experienced in normal life. The tomb environment seems designed to heighten consciousness while simultaneously creating a sense of disconnection from ordinary reality. Visitors often report feeling simultaneously more aware and more dreamlike than usual. And you may realize something odd, that these places were not designed for remembrance. They were designed for concealment. The tomb was not a display case. It was a barrier between worlds. This realization represents one of the most profound insights available to modern tomb visitors. The discovery that these elaborate monuments were actually designed to be hidden and forgotten challenges common assumptions about ancient Egyptian attitudes toward memory and commemoration. The concealment was not merely practical, aimed at protecting valuable burial goods from theft. It was theological, based on the belief that the pharaoh's transformation into a god required complete separation from the world of the living. The tomb served as a cocoon for this metamorphosis, and like a cocoon, it was meant to be left behind once its purpose was fulfilled. A barrier function of the tomb operated on multiple levels. Physically, it separated the dead from the living through massive stone walls and elaborate security systems. Spiritually, it created a space where different rules applied, where the normal limitations of time and mortality were suspended. Psychologically, it provided a zone of transition where the human mind could contemplate realities that were too vast and overwhelming to be faced directly. In the stillness of a royal tomb, the pharaoh becomes something less grand and more human, vulnerable, hoped for. dressed in linen, wrapped in intention, and placed in the care of gods and silence. The paradox of the royal tomb is that in attempting to preserve the pharaoh's divine nature for eternity, it reveals his essential humanity. The elaborate preparations, the massive expenditure of resources, the intricate rituals, all speak to a profound anxiety about death and impermanence that is fundamentally human. The mummy, for all its sacred wrappings and protective amulets, remains a fragile bundle of preserved flesh that testifies to the ultimate vulnerability of even the most powerful rulers. The burial goods, despite their value and craftsmanship, represent desperate attempts to extend earthly comforts and privileges into a realm where such things may have no meaning. The hope that pervades every aspect of the tomb represents perhaps the most human element of all. The hope that death is not final, that consciousness can survive the dissolution of the body, that love and memory can transcend time. These are desires that unite the ancient pharaohs with every human being who has ever faced mortality. He does not speak. He does not rise. He simply waits, and now so do we. The waiting that characterizes the tomb's essential nature extends beyond the mummified pharaoh to encompass all who encounter these spaces. The tomb creates a temporal suspension where normal concepts of progress and activity cease to apply. Time becomes circular rather than linear, measured not by change and development, but by the rhythms of decay and preservation. The silence of the waiting is pregnant with possibility. In the absence of definitive answers about death and afterlife, the tomb becomes a space for contemplation and wonder. The visitor is drawn into the same state of suspended animation that characterizes the mummy, waiting for revelations that may never come, hoping for understanding that may always remain just beyond reach. This shared waiting creates a connection across millennia between the ancient pharaoh and the modern visitor. Both exist in the space between life and death, between knowledge and mystery, between hope and despair. The tomb becomes a meditation on the human condition itself, stripped of the distractions and complications of daily life. As you prepare to leave this underground realm and return to the world of light and air above, you carry with you more than just memories and impressions. You carry questions that have no easy answers and insights that will continue to unfold long after you have emerged from the depths. The tomb has done its work, not by providing solutions to the mystery of death, but by making that mystery more profound and more personal. The journey upward toward the surface reverses the descent that brought you here, but you are not the same person who entered. The tomb has changed you in ways that may not become apparent until much later. You have been initiated into one of humanity's oldest mysteries, and that initiation creates responsibilities as well as privileges. The sunlight, when you finally reach it, will seem almost violently bright after the tomb's gentle darkness. The heat will feel aggressive after the cool stone stillness. The sounds of the modern world will seem harsh and chaotic after the profound silence below. But these contrasts are necessary. They remind you that you have indeed traveled between worlds and returned with something precious. The knowledge that mystery exists, that not everything can be explained or understood, and that some questions are more important than their answers. Yet the tomb's influence does not end at its threshold. The memory of that underground stillness will follow you, creating moments of unexpected contemplation in the midst of ordinary life. You will find yourself pausing in busy streets, remembering the weight of stone silence. You will notice shadows differently, understanding how darkness can be as revealing as light. You will think about time not as a river flowing toward an inevitable end, but as a vast ocean in which past and present exist simultaneously. And perhaps, in quiet moments, you will understand what the ancient Egyptians knew, that death is not the opposite of life, but its deepest mystery, and that the greatest monuments are not those built to proclaim victory over mortality, but those created to honor the questions that mortality poses. The royal tomb stands as humanity's most ambitious attempt to create a space worthy of those questions, a place where the mystery of existence can be contemplated in all its terrible beauty. The pharaoh waits in his stone chamber, wrapped in linen and hope, neither fully alive nor completely dead, but suspended in that liminal space where all the most important questions reside. And in visiting him, in sharing his silence and his waiting, we discover that we too are part of that suspension, that we too exist in the space between certainty and mystery, between the known and the unknowable. But the tomb holds more secrets than we have yet explored, mysteries that extend beyond the burial chamber itself into the very foundations of how ancient civilizations understood power, death, and the cosmos. What we have witnessed in these underground chambers represents only the final act of a drama that began long before the pharaoh's death. In the living world above, where the business of preparing for eternity shaped every aspect of royal existence. Tonight, we chose a different path into the past, one less trodden by eager tourists and documentary crews. We sought not the blinding gleam of Tutankhamun's treasures, nor the colossal majesty of Ramesses the Great's temples that shout their presence to the heavens. Instead, our gaze settled on the quiet corners, on the overlooked echoes, on the subtle shifts in the desert air that still carry the whispers of lives lived long ago. We began, as life itself often did in that ancient land, by the rhythm of the Nile. Not the grand, overflowing torrent, but the gentle lapping against the muddy banks, the fertile silt it deposited with unwavering precision. Imagine, if you will, the broad, flat expanse of the floodplain stretching out under a sky that was, then as now, a canvas of deep, immutable blue by day, and an unimaginable tapestry of stars by night. Here, the lifeblood of Egypt, the inundation, was not a disaster, but a blessing, a miracle of renewal. The farmers, those anonymous multitudes upon whose strong backs the very foundations of this civilization were built, felt this rhythm in their bones. Their lives were inexorably tied to the river's ebb and flow. They knew, with a certainty passed down through generations, when to prepare the fields, when to mend their simple tools, when to watch for the first telltale signs of the waters rising. Their days began not with the clang of alarms, but with the subtle shift in the light, the first hint of sun touching the eastern desert cliffs. They would rise from their mud brick homes, small, humble dwellings that offered scant protection from the summer heat, but ample shelter from the night's chill. The air would be cool then, carrying the scent of damp earth and the distant murmur of the river. Their breakfast, a frugal affair of bread and perhaps some dates, was eaten quickly, fueling them for the arduous work ahead. Then, armed with simple hoes and wooden plows, often pulled by oxen or even by their own strained muscles, they would make their way to the fields. These fields, nurtured by the Nile's gifts, were the source of Egypt's prodigious wealth in grain. Wheat and barley were the staples, providing the flour for their daily bread, the base for their beer, and the surplus that fed the priests, the scribes, the artisans, and the pharaoh himself. The sun would ascend, relentless and fierce, beating down on their exposed skin. Hours would pass in rhythmic, back-breaking labor. The soft thud of the hoe striking the earth, the rustle of dry stalks, the occasional lowing of an animal, or the shared grunt of effort as a heavy load was shifted. These were the dominant sounds of their world. There was little wasted motion, little extraneous noise. Every action was deliberate, honed by centuries of practice, aimed at coaxing life from the soil. Their lives were not without simple joys, though. The shared meal at midday in the sliver of shade cast by a palm tree, the camaraderie of working alongside family and neighbors, the relief of the evening breeze as they returned home, their bodies aching but their hearts perhaps content with a day's honest labor, the laughter of children playing in the dust, the quiet murmur of a story told by an elder, the gentle cadence of a mother singing a lullaby to her child as dusk settled over the land. These were the small, precious moments that punctuated the demanding rhythm of their existence. It was a life deeply connected to the earth, to the sky, to the river. A life dictated by the seasons, by the rising and setting of the sun, by the immutable cycles of nature. And in this deep connection, perhaps, there was a profound sense of belonging, a quiet understanding of their place within the grand, ancient order of things. They understood instinctively that their toil was not just for themselves, but for the continuity of the entire civilization. Every grain harvested was a contribution to the granaries of the pharaoh, to the sustenance of the temples, to the very fabric of their world. It was a silent contract, signed with sweat and endurance, between the people and their benevolent, life-giving river. From the sun-drenched fields, our journey took us inward, into the shaded, private courts, where another, entirely different rhythm pulsed. We spoke of a woman who once ruled a kingdom with steady hands and careful words. Her name, though perhaps not immediately as recognizable to all as Cleopatra or Nefertiti, was no less significant in the long tapestry of Egyptian history. We speak, of course, of Hatshepsut. Her story is one of audacious ambition, of a quiet, determined will that challenged the deeply ingrained patriarchal norms of her time. Imagine her not in the stiff, idealized portrayals of her statues, but as a living, breathing woman navigating the treacherous currents of court politics. Her voice, though undoubtedly regal, must have held a timbre of authority, a quiet conviction that commanded respect. Her movements, though perhaps draped in the heavy linens of pharaonic attire, were purposeful, deliberate. She did not rule with booming pronouncements from the battlements, but with careful words exchanged in hushed tones within the palace walls. The palace, far from being a singular, imposing fortress, was likely a sprawling complex of interconnected buildings, administrative offices, royal residences, temples, and private courtyards, all designed to facilitate the complex machinery of governance and the daily rituals of the divine ruler. Within these courts, the air would have been thick with the scent of incense, the rustle of official papyrus scrolls, and the soft, measured tread of courtiers, scribes, and priests. Here, decisions that shaped the lives of millions were made, not with fiery debates, but with studied diplomacy, quiet negotiation, and the subtle interplay of power and influence. Hatshepsut, as a woman occupying the role of pharaoh, faced unique challenges. She could not rely on traditional displays of male dominance. Instead, she had to cultivate a different kind of strength, intellectual prowess, strategic foresight, and an unshakable inner resolve. Her steady hands were not those of a warrior wielding a sword, but those that meticulously signed decrees, that gestured with calm authority during audiences, that directed the vast resources of the kingdom. Her careful words were those that persuaded reluctant officials, that inspired loyalty, that articulated her vision for a prosperous Egypt. Her reign, though often overshadowed by the subsequent attempts to erase her from history, was a period of remarkable stability and prosperity. She initiated ambitious building projects, most notably her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, a structure that even today inspires, all with its elegant terrace design and its harmonious integration with the natural landscape. This was not a temple built for ostentatious display, but a testament to her piety, her ambition, and her understanding of her divine mandate. She also fostered trade expeditions, the most famous being the voyage to the mythical land of Punt, which brought back exotic goods like frankincense, myrrh, gold, and even live trees. These ventures were not just about economic gain. They were about reinforcing Egypt's prestige, demonstrating its reach, and fulfilling a pharaoh's duty to enrich the land. Imagine the countless hours she spent in quiet contemplation, in strategic planning, in receiving petitions, and dispensing justice. The sounds of her world within those shaded courts would have been subtle. The scratch of a scribe's reed pen, the murmur of conversation, the distant chant of priests, the gentle splashing of water in a garden fountain. It was a world of hushed power, of carefully orchestrated rituals, of decisions made not in a burst of passion, but with the calm, measured logic of a seasoned ruler. She held the threads of an empire in her hands, not with a forceful grip, but with a nuanced understanding of their delicate interconnections. The sheer weight of responsibility, the constant need for vigilance, the knowledge that the well-being of an entire nation rested on her judgment. These were the burdens she carried, and she carried them with a quiet dignity. Her legacy, despite the efforts of those who followed her to obliterate it, speaks of a profound intelligence and an unwavering dedication to her role. Her reign was a testament to the idea that true power lies not in overt displays of force, but in the steady application of wisdom and foresight. And then, our whispered journey took an intriguing turn, a step into the realm of the unknown, the tantalizing possibility of what lies hidden beneath the earth. We spoke of wandering the possible halls of a building that may still lie hidden, waiting for a patient eye to rediscover it. This is the realm of the archaeologist's dream, the tantalizing whisper of untouched history, the silent promise of discoveries yet to be made. While the great temples and tombs of Egypt have long yielded their secrets, the vastness of the land, the shifting sands, and the immense passage of time mean that countless structures, perhaps even entire cities, remain buried, perfectly preserved beneath layers of dust and debris. Think of the lost cities of the desert, places like the mythical Zarqa, or the whispered about administrative centers that served the pharaohs beyond the well-explored Nile Valley. The notion of a hidden building evokes a powerful sense of anticipation, a feeling akin to standing on the edge of a great mystery. It suggests not only physical concealment, but also the preservation of a moment in time, an architectural snapshot untouched by the ravages of human interaction for millennia. What kind of building might it be? Perhaps a palace of a lesser-known king, an administrative complex that managed a particular industry, or even a temple dedicated to an obscure deity. The possibilities are endless, and each holds the potential to rewrite pages of our understanding of ancient Egypt. Imagine the intricate details that might still be intact. Vibrant frescoes on the walls, depicting daily life, religious ceremonies, or historical events. Statues of gods or pharaohs, their colors still brilliant. Papyrus scrolls carefully stored in niches, containing administrative records, literary texts, or even personal letters that offer a glimpse into the emotional lives of the ancients. The silence around such a hidden place would be absolute, a profound quietude that has held sway for thousands of years. It would be a silence broken only by the whispers of the wind sifting through the sand above, or perhaps the distant call of a desert bird. The air within would be still, thick with the scent of ancient dust, a palpable sense of time arrested. The discovery of such a place is not a sudden, dramatic event, but a painstaking process. It begins with subtle clues, anomalous readings from ground-penetrating radar, a faint discoloration in the sand observed from an aerial photograph, or perhaps an ancient text hinting at a location now forgotten. Then comes the careful excavation, a meticulous peeling back of layers, not unlike an archaeologist performing surgery on the earth itself. Every scoop of sand, every brushstroke, is deliberate, weighed against the potential damage to what lies beneath. The anticipation during such a dig must be almost unbearable. Each fragment of pottery, each stray bead, each carefully placed stone adds another piece to the puzzle, building a clearer picture of what might lie beneath. And then, the moment of breakthrough. The first glimpse of an exposed wall, a carved lintel, or a column emerging from the earth. It is a moment of profound connection, a tangible link across the vast chasm of time. To be the first human eyes to gaze upon a structure unseen for millennia, to step into a space that has been suspended in eternal quiet, is to experience a unique form of awe. It is not about the value of any specific artifact, but the sheer wonder of presence, of being a witness to a past that suddenly, miraculously, becomes present again. Such a discovery doesn't merely add to our knowledge. It deepens our sense of wonder, reminding us how much of history still lies hidden patiently waiting for the patient eye, the dedicated hand, and the unwavering curiosity of those who seek to understand the quiet stories beneath the sand. Finally, our path led us to the most profound silence of all, the heart of stone tombs, where breathless silence has lingered longer than memory. These are not merely burial places. They are meticulously crafted vessels for eternity, designed to cradle the deceased through the perilous journey to the afterlife, and to provide a lasting home for their ka and ba, their vital essences. To descend into a tomb, especially one that has remained undisturbed for millennia, is to step into a realm where time itself seems to slow, where the very air feels ancient and heavy with the weight of departed souls. The descent often begins with a narrow passageway, perhaps steeply inclined, plunging into the cool darkness of the earth. The light from above quickly fades, and one becomes reliant on the faint beam of a flashlight, illuminating the rough-hewn walls, or, in grander tombs, the exquisitely carved and painted surfaces. The air changes too. It grows cooler, drier, carrying the faint, earthy scent of ancient stone and dust. Every sound becomes amplified in this enclosed space. The soft scuff of a shoe, the gentle rustle of clothing, the subtle shift of air as one breathes. These sounds, usually mundane, become resonant, almost intrusive, against the backdrop of such profound quiet. As one progresses deeper, the true purpose of the tomb becomes evident. The walls, ceilings, and even sometimes the floors are covered in a breathtaking array of hieroglyphs and vibrant frescoes. These are not mere decorations. They are the spell book for the afterlife, the narrative of the deceased's journey, the prayers and offerings to the gods, the depictions of daily life meant to be magically perpetuated in the eternal realm. Each figure, each symbol, each color was chosen with deliberate intent, part of a sophisticated system of belief designed to ensure the deceased's successful transition. The colors, derived from natural pigments, often retain an astonishing vibrancy, as if applied only yesterday, protected from the harsh light and elements by the very earth itself. To behold them untouched by human hands for thousands of years is to feel a direct connection to the ancient artists, to their skill, their beliefs, and their unwavering dedication to their craft. At the very heart of the tomb lies the burial chamber, often the most elaborately decorated space. Here, the sarcophagus, a massive stone coffin, would once have held the mummified body of the deceased. Even when the sarcophagus is empty, a victim of ancient tomb robbers, its sheer presence speaks volumes of the individual it was intended to house. The silence here is of a different quality altogether. It is not just the absence of sound, but a pervasive stillness that seems to absorb all noise, to quiet the very beating of one's heart. It is the silence of profound finality, of eternal rest, of a space consecrated to the dead. Yet it is also a silence brimming with presence, with the echoes of ancient rituals, of whispered prayers, of the hopes and fears of those who constructed it. The sheer expenditure of effort, the meticulous planning, the artistic genius, and the profound faith required to create such a resting place is almost unfathomable to the modern mind. The breathless silence that lingers here is not empty. It is filled with the unwritten stories of the tomb builders, the priests who performed the funerary rites, the family members who mourned and hoped for their loved ones' eternal well-being. It is a silence that has absorbed the passage of empires, the rise and fall of dynasties, the shifting sands of time. It has outlasted memories, outlasted the very names of many of the individuals interred within. And in that stillness, one feels a profound sense of humility, a realization of the ephemeral nature of human life, contrasted with the enduring power of stone and belief. This is where the ancient world truly breathes in the hush, where the boundaries between past and present dissolve, and one is left with an almost spiritual connection to the timeless rhythms of life, death, and eternity. What lingers now, as the stories grow faint and your breathing slows, is a feeling, a rhythm, the same rhythm that guided farmers to their fields, that echoed in the oar strokes of traders returning from hunt, that shaped the chisel marks of tomb builders. and the hymns of those who whispered to gods beneath the stars. It is a rhythm that underpinned every facet of life in ancient Egypt, a pervasive and comforting hum that resonated through the millennia. Consider the rhythm of the farmers. It was a primal cadence, dictated by the sun and the Nile, the slow, steady pull of the plow through the rich, dark earth, the rhythmic scattering of seeds by hand, the patient wait for the floodwaters to recede, the synchronized swing of the sickle during harvest, the methodical threshing of grain. These were not frantic, hurried movements, but deliberate, practiced motions repeated day after day, season after season, for thousands of years. It was a rhythm of patience, of trust in the natural cycles, of an unwavering commitment to sustenance. Their bodies learned this rhythm, becoming extensions of the land they cultivated, moving with a silent efficiency born of necessity and tradition. The very pulse of their lives beat in harmony with the earth. Then there was the rhythm of the traders returning from hunt. Imagine the long, arduous journey by sea or land, the challenges of navigation, the negotiations for exotic goods. And then the journey home. The oar strokes as they cut through the waters of the Red Sea or the Nile would have been a collective pulse, a unified effort by dozens of men. The splash and pull, the creak of timber, the chant of the bosun, the shared grunts of effort, these sounds would have merged into a powerful, hypnotic rhythm, propelling them forward, closer to home, closer to the rich rewards of their enterprise. This rhythm was one of perseverance, of collective purpose, of the profound satisfaction that comes from a successful endeavor. It connected distant lands to the heart of Egypt, bringing new resources and new ideas, all driven by this powerful, human-powered beat. The chisel marks of tomb builders tell an even more profound story of rhythm. This was a rhythm of creation, of transformation, of shaping raw stone into eternal monuments. The sharp tap, tap, tap of the chisel against the hard rock, the shower of stone dust, the rhythmic swing of the mallet, the deep thud as a massive block was carefully set into place. This was a slow, painstaking process, requiring immense skill, incredible endurance, and an almost spiritual dedication. Each blow, each cut, was part of a larger, meticulously planned sequence, designed to bring form and meaning to the inert stone. The thousands upon thousands of these rhythmic impacts, repeated over years, even decades, built the pyramids, carved the hypostyle halls, and sculpted the colossal statues that still stand testament to their unwavering dedication. It was a rhythm of meticulous craftsmanship, of artistic vision brought to life through sheer, repetitive effort. And finally, the hymns of those who whispered to gods beneath the stars. This was a rhythm of devotion, of spiritual connection, of seeking harmony with the divine. The intonation of prayers, the resonant chants in the temples at dawn and dusk, the rhythmic movements of priests during ceremonies, the quiet murmur of personal supplications under the vast, starlit desert sky. These were not loud, boisterous declarations, but often hushed, reverent utterances designed to align the human spirit with the cosmic order. The rhythm of these hymns was one of reverence, of seeking guidance, of expressing gratitude, of acknowledging the profound mysteries of existence. It was a rhythm that connected the earthly realm to the celestial, linking the daily lives of Egyptians to the grand, overarching narrative of their mythology and beliefs. All these rhythms, seemingly disparate, converged to form the overarching pulse of ancient Egyptian civilization. They were the silent, unseen forces that shaped lives, built monuments, fostered trade, and sustained a belief system that endured for millennia. Ancient Egypt was not a place of noise, not always. It was more often a place of patterns, of rituals, of steady motion against a vast backdrop of time. This observation is crucial to understanding the deeper essence of this civilization, often misrepresented by the dramatic, high-energy narratives of adventure and conflict. The true power of Egypt lay not in sudden bursts of activity or chaotic innovation, but in its profound adherence to established forms, its deep respect for tradition, and its unwavering commitment to cosmic order. The patterns were everywhere, woven into the very fabric of existence. In the predictable cycles of the Nile's inundation, which dictated the rhythm of agricultural life. In the celestial movements of the sun, moon, and stars, meticulously observed and incorporated into their calendars and religious beliefs. In the symmetrical designs of their temple architecture, mirroring the harmony they sought in the universe. In the unchanging artistic conventions of their reliefs and paintings, where figures were depicted in specific, stylized ways, not for realism, but for symbolic clarity and eternal permanence. Even their hieroglyphic script followed intricate patterns, each symbol a miniature work of art, arranged in a deliberate and meaningful order. These patterns provided a sense of stability, predictability, and cosmic reassurance in a world that could, at times, be harsh and unpredictable. They offered a framework for understanding, a blueprint for living. And within these patterns, there blossomed the rituals. Rituals for every occasion, from the mundane to the sacred. The daily rituals of offering to the gods in the temples, performed with precise gestures, specific incantations, and carefully chosen offerings. The elaborate funerary rituals, designed to guide the deceased safely through the perils of the underworld and ensure their eternal rebirth. The state rituals, like the Sed festival, reenacting the pharaoh's rejuvenation and reaffirming his divine kingship. Even daily life was imbued with ritualistic elements: the preparation of food, the dressing of the body, the blessing of a home. These rituals were not empty gestures. They were potent acts, believed to maintain the balance of Maat, the cosmic principle of truth, justice, and order. They connected the individual to the collective, the present to the eternal, and the human to the divine. Each ritual was a tiny thread in the vast, intricate tapestry of their belief system, reinforcing their connection to the gods and their place in the universe. They provided comfort, meaning, and a sense of belonging. This adherence to patterns and rituals fostered a pervasive sense of steady motion against a vast backdrop of time. Change, when it occurred, was often slow, incremental, almost imperceptible. Empires rose and fell, dynasties shifted, but the fundamental underlying principles of Egyptian civilization endured for millennia. The river continued to flow, the sun continued to rise, and the essential tasks of life and worship continued with a profound, almost geological patience. Their monuments, built of enduring stone, were testaments to this long view of time, designed to last for eternity, not merely for a few generations. Their entire worldview was rooted in this concept of endless cycles, of rebirth and renewal, of a past that was never truly gone, but always echoing into the present. Even the Nile, with all its gifts and dangers, flowed not in frenzy, but in slow, seasonal certainty. Its annual inundation was a powerful, transformative event, but it was predictable, reliable. It was not a chaotic, destructive force, but a nurturing, life-giving artery that pulsed with a steady, unwavering rhythm. This certainty, this reliable ebb and flow, provided the foundation for their agricultural prosperity, their social organization, and their deep-seated belief in cosmic order. It was the ultimate manifestation of Maat in the natural world. And in that rhythm, in that pervasive sense of predictable patterns, enduring rituals, and steady, cyclical motion, there is comfort. A deep, abiding comfort that comes from knowing one's place in a stable, well-ordered universe. A comfort that transcended the individual, connecting them to a grand, eternal narrative. It was a comfort that allowed them to face the uncertainties of life and death with a quiet resilience, knowing that the fundamental order of their world would endure. It was the comfort of belonging to something vast and ancient, something that flowed with the same unwavering certainty as the Nile itself. This feeling of profound comfort, born from predictability and order, is perhaps one of the most enduring legacies of ancient Egypt. Though millennia have passed, And the gods of the Nile now sleep beneath layers of belief and change. The echoes remain. In the quiet curve of a hieroglyph, in the still corners of a ruined temple, in the silent pressure on a sealed chamber. These are not mere remnants. They are the tangible whispers of a civilization that understood the profound power of enduring form, of the subtle rather than the overt. The quiet curve of a hieroglyph is more than just a written symbol. It is a miniature work of art, a distillation of meaning and belief into a precise, elegant form. Imagine the scribe, seated cross-legged, reed pen in hand, meticulously rendering each bird, each human figure, each stylized object onto papyrus or carving it into stone. The process itself would have been a meditative one, a rhythmic dance of hand and eye. These aren't crude scratches. They are often exquisitely detailed, imbued with an aesthetic grace that belies their functional purpose. Each curve, each line, each tiny detail holds within it not just a phonetic sound or a pictorial representation, but also layers of symbolic meaning, echoes of an entire worldview. To trace these curves with one's gaze is to connect with the very hand that formed them, to feel the silent intention behind each stroke. They speak not with a shout, but with a profound, enduring elegance, a quiet statement of their continued existence across the vast expanse of time. They represent a language that, even when unread by modern eyes, still communicates a sense of ancient order and beauty. The still corners of a ruined temple offer another kind of echo. These are not the grand, bustling centers they once were, filled with the chants of priests, the murmur of supplicants, the smoke of incense. Now they stand open to the sky, their roofs long gone, their walls often crumbling. But it is precisely in this state of ruin that their quiet power becomes most evident. The sunlight filters through broken archways, illuminating dust motes dancing in the silent air. The wind whispers through empty hypostyle halls, carrying the scent of dry stone and desert sand. In these corners, untouched by the direct path of tourists, one can feel the lingering presence of forgotten rituals, of ancient prayers that once resonated within these very stones. A faint echo of a procession, the ghost of a silent offering, the quiet presence of a deity who once received devotion here. The stillness is not one of emptiness, but of profound memory, a quiet repository of countless acts of faith and devotion. The absence of noise allows the imagination to fill the void, to reconstruct the sounds and sights of a bygone era, all guided by the subtle architectural cues that remain. And then, the silent pressure of a sealed chamber. This is perhaps the most potent echo of all. A chamber that has remained undisturbed for millennia, its contents preserved in a vacuum of time. It is a space where the air itself seems ancient, thick with the scent of unbreached antiquity. The pressure is not just physical, the weight of earth and stone above, but also temporal, the immense weight of time that has passed without intrusion. This is where the profound silence of the tomb truly manifests, a silence so complete it verges on the spiritual. It is a silence that speaks of secrets held, of destinies unsealed, of beliefs profoundly held and meticulously enacted. To stand before such a chamber, even from afar, is to feel the presence of its guardians, the ancient spells and protections designed to keep it inviolate. It is a space where the past is not merely recalled, but is palpably present, held in suspension. Perhaps, as you lie here now, the ancient world doesn't feel so far. It lingers in the calm. It breathes in the hush. And just as the tombs were not made to be seen, this moment is not made to be remembered. Only felt, the very act of quiet contemplation, of allowing the mind to wander through these ancient landscapes and forgotten spaces, is an act of connection. The calm is the deep, steady current of timelessness that runs beneath the surface of our noisy, hurried modern lives. The hush is the absence of external distractions, allowing the internal landscape to align with the echoes of the past. The tombs, with their concealed treasures and hidden chambers, were not built for public display. They were built for eternity, for the deceased's journey, for the gods. Their true purpose was internal, sacred, not meant for the casual gaze. And so, too, this moment of quiet reflection is not for external validation or future recall, but for the profound personal experience of the present. It is about feeling the resonance of ancient rhythms, the lingering presence of an enduring civilization deep within your own being. It is about allowing the quiet power of history to seep into your consciousness, to become a felt reality rather than a remembered fact. So close your eyes, let the images blur, let the hum of time carry you gently beyond the river, beyond the reed fields, and into stillness. The kind of stillness that held empires, and now holds you. As your eyelids descend, the sharp edges of the images we've conjured begin to soften, to blend. The vibrant colors of the frescoes bleed into the deep indigo of the night sky. The rhythmic thud of the farmer's hoe merges with the gentle splash of oars on the Nile. The quiet authority of Hatshepsut's court dissolves into the boundless quiet of a buried chamber. This blurring is not a loss, but a transformation, allowing the individual scenes to coalesce into a singular, pervasive feeling. The details fade, but the essence remains. It allows your mind to release the specific narratives and embrace the broader, more encompassing sensation of ancient Egypt's enduring presence. The hum of time is not a loud roar, but a deep, resonant vibration, a subtle thrum that underlies all existence. It is the continuous, ceaseless flow of moments into eternity. Tonight, we've tuned into a particular frequency of this hum, one that resonates with the rhythms of millennia past. This hum is the invisible current that connects us to the lives lived long ago, to the dust that settled over their cities, to the stars that shone upon their dreams. It is the gentle carrier wave, effortlessly transporting your awareness across the vast expanse of history, not as a journey through a tumultuous storm, but as a quiet, serene drift. Let this hum carry you gently beyond the river, past the very lifeline of ancient Egypt, no longer focused on its specific banks or its fertile floodplains, but beyond its physical presence, into the symbolic realm it represents the flow of life, the source of sustenance, the unwavering continuity. Then, let it carry you beyond the reed fields, those vital, rustling expanses that provided shelter, building materials, and a sense of wild, untamed beauty. These represent the boundaries of the known, the cultivated, the tangible. To go beyond them is to enter a space of pure potential, of unmanifested quietude. And finally, let this gentle current guide you into stillness. Not an empty, cold stillness, but a stillness brimming with the echoes of everything we've explored. This is the kind of stillness that held empires. Imagine the profound quiet within the core of a massive pyramid, the centuries of silent vigilance of its stone, undisturbed by the world outside, or the hushed reverence within a temple after the last worshiper has left, where the sacred air itself seems to vibrate with unspoken power. This was the stillness in which great decisions were pondered, in which profound spiritual truths were sought, in which the very fabric of civilization was woven thread by quiet thread. Empires were not sustained by perpetual clamor, but by the deep, enduring stillness at their heart, a stillness born of order, belief, and unwavering tradition. And now, that very stillness holds you. It envelops you, cradles you, a quiet embrace that transcends time and space. It is the stillness that allows your own internal rhythms to slow, to align with the ancient pulse we've discovered. It is a moment of profound peace, where the anxieties of the present gently recede, replaced by a sense of deep, timeless connection. In this stillness, you are not merely observing ancient Egypt. You are, in a very real and felt sense, a part of its enduring legacy. You are connected to the farmers, the queens, the hidden buildings, the silent tombs. Their quiet rhythms now resonate within you. Sleep well. May the comfort of this ancient stillness guide you into a restful night, a night where the echoes of eternity softly lull you into slumber. And as you drift, perhaps you'll find that the past isn't truly past, but a quiet, enduring presence within the deep chambers of your own subconscious. When you awaken, you may discover a renewed sense of the profound, often overlooked, beauty that lies beneath the surface, beyond the noise.